Hey guys, tonight we embark on a rather speculative voyage, a gentle drift through the starlit potentials of our own future. Imagine, just for a moment, the sleek silhouette of a starship against the velvet curtain of space, its running lights blinking like distant, knowing eyes. You're on the bridge, the gentle hum of the engines a lullaby, the view screen a canvas of impossible beauty. We're going to ponder if that iconic, hopeful vision, the one painted by Gene Roddenberry and countless others, the future of Star Trek, could ever truly be ours. Is it a destination we can reach, or just a beautiful, impossible dream now? A little reality check before we get too starry-eyed based on current galactic collision forecasts and the general lifespan of most civilizations that don't figure out how to stop squabbling over prime real estate. You probably won't survive to see a fully functioning Federation. Just saying, it's a long game, this cosmic evolution. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Go on, I'll wait. And while you're at it, I'd love to see where you're tuning in from and what time it is in your corner of the world. Post it in the comments below. It's always fascinating to see our little community scattered across the globe, all listening to the same quiet thoughts. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You settle into that comfortable chair, the one that seems to mold perfectly to your form, and the notion of Starfleet's Earth begins to crystallize in your mind. It's a planet, we're told, reborn. No more hunger, no more poverty, no more war over dwindling resources. The United Federation of Planets, with Earth as a founding member, represents a pinnacle of socio-political evolution, a harmonious collective of diverse species all working towards common goals of peace, exploration, and knowledge. It's a lovely thought, isn't it? A world where your daily concern isn't about making rent or worrying about the next geopolitical flare-up, but perhaps whether the tomatoes in your hydroponic garden are getting enough simulated sunlight, or which nebula you'll be charting next semester at the Academy. You try to picture it, truly picture it, beyond the glossy promotional vids Starfleet might produce. Imagine walking through a city on this future Earth. What do you see? Perhaps parks that stretch for miles, seamlessly blending into architecture that seems to grow organically from the landscape. Clean air, the kind that feels crisp and invigorating with every breath, carrying the faint scent of blossoms from genetically engineered trees that bloom year-round. People of all backgrounds, and perhaps even a few off-world visitors with subtly different facial structures or a distinguished set of antennae, mingling with an easy camaraderie. There are no overflowing bins, no blaring advertisements assaulting your senses, no obvious signs of economic disparity. Children laugh freely, chasing holographic butterflies in a public square. Their education a blend of experiential learning and access to the entirety of the Federation's knowledge database. It sounds idyllic, almost suspiciously so. Could we, humanity as we are now, ever reach such a state? You lean back, the hum of your imaginary starship a soothing drone. The core of the Federation's success seems to be unity in a shared altruistic purpose. Think about our own history for a moment. The concept of unifying disparate groups is certainly not new. The Roman Empire, for all its brutal expansionism, did bring a form of unity, the Pax Romana, to a vast territory for a significant period. It connected diverse cultures with roads, laws, and a common, albeit imposed, administrative language. Of course, that unity was built on conquest and maintained by legions, a rather different model from Starfleet's voluntary association of equals. Still, it demonstrates a human capacity for large-scale organization. Then you consider the ideals themselves. Altruism, working for the common good. These are concepts we praise, aspirations we teach, yet often struggle to implement on a global scale. Scientists still argue whether true altruism, a selfless act with absolutely no benefit to the individual, even an indirect genetic one, can genuinely exist in a species shaped by natural selection? Or is our kindness always, at some level, a sophisticated form of self-interest? a way to build social capital or ensure reciprocal aid. If it's the latter, can a society truly transcend the undercurrents of competition and self-preservation that seem so deeply wired into us? Star Trek proposes that we can, usually after a rather nasty period of global conflict, often referred to as the eugenics wars or World War III, that serves as a horrific wake-up call. It's a narrative trope, the phoenix rising from the ashes. Humanity hits rock bottom, realizes the futility of its internal squabbles, and then somehow finds a collective will to build something better. This great awakening is critical. Without it, the Federation seems impossible. You wonder what kind of catalyst it would take in our current world. Would it require a global catastrophe far exceeding anything we've seen? Or could it be a slower, more gradual enlightenment driven by education and interconnectedness? You let your mind wander to historical attempts at creating utopian societies, small-scale experiments in communal living, and shared ideals. Think of the Shakers in 18th and 19th century America, with their principles of communal ownership, celibacy, and pacifism. They created prosperous, orderly communities renowned for their craftsmanship and simple living. For a time, they thrived. But, well, celibacy isn't exactly a winning strategy for long-term demographic expansion, is it? A bit of a design flaw if you're aiming for galactic membership. That's one of our little jokes for tonight. Hope it landed gently. Or consider the various socialist and communist experiments over the 20th century. The ideal was often enable a society free from class exploitation, where resources were shared according to need. The reality, however, frequently involved authoritarianism, economic mismanagement, and the suppression of individual freedoms. It turns out that abolishing greed by decree is a bit like trying to dry water with more water. Human nature, it seems, is a stubborn variable in the utopian equation. The desire for more, for better, for different, seems almost intrinsic. Could a society like the Federation truly satisfy everyone without resorting to some form of subtle conditioning, or by simply having so much abundance that envy becomes pointless? The Federation isn't just about humans. Of course, it's a vast tapestry of species. This introduces another layer of complexity. Imagine the sheer diplomatic effort required to get dozens, if not hundreds, of species with different evolutionary paths, different psychologies, different values, different environmental needs. Some might thrive in methane atmospheres. Others might find oxygen positively corrosive to agree on a common charter and a unified approach to galactic affairs. We struggle to get it all human nations on the same page about climate change. Imagine trying to negotiate a trade agreement with a species that communicates primarily through pheromones and considers direct eye contact a declaration of war. The show often glosses over these incredible hurdles with the magic of diplomacy and shared values. But you can't help but feel it would be an administrative nightmare. Just scheduling the annual Federation Bake-Off would be a logistical headache of cosmic proportions. Remember, the Andorians are bringing their ice sculpture cake, so no leaving it near the Tellarite delegation's heat lamps this year. Perhaps the key lies in a fundamental shift in consciousness, an evolution beyond our current tribal instincts. Star Trek often hints at this, suggesting that humanity has grown up. What does that growing up entail? Is it shedding biases, overcoming irrational fears, developing a profound empathy not just for our own kind, but for all sentient life? If so, how do we accelerate that process? Education, certainly. Exposure to different cultures, absolutely. But is there a neurological component too? Are future humans somehow better and more rational, less prone to emotional outbursts that lead to interstellar incidents? It's a comforting thought, but also slightly unnerving, hinting at a kind of soft eugenics of temperament. You ponder the sheer scale of the Federation's Earth. Billions of people living in apparent harmony. What are the social structures that support this? We see Starfleet, of course, a quasi-military organization dedicated to exploration, defense, and diplomacy. But what about civilian life? Are there still artists, philosophers, chefs, gardeners, people who simply want to live quiet lives without venturing into the final frontier. The show implies yes, but focuses primarily on the adventurers. For this utopia to be truly appealing, it can't just be a society of overachievers in matching uniforms. It needs space for the dreamers. The dissenters, though dissent seems remarkably polite in the 24th century, the gloriously ordinary. One quirky little tidbit that comes to mind is the Great Stink of London in 1858. The River Thames was so polluted with human waste and industrial effluent that the smell was overwhelming, even causing Parliament to consider relocating. This crisis spurred the development of London's revolutionary sewer system, a massive feat of engineering that dramatically improved public health. It was a tangible problem, a sensory assault, that forced a solution. Perhaps global unity requires problems that are so undeniably, viscerally shared that cooperation becomes the only rational path. Climate change feels like it should be that, but our collective response is still, well, less than Federation grade. The dream of a unified, peaceful Earth, a cornerstone of the Star Trek future, remains tantalizing. It speaks to our deepest aspirations for security, belonging, and purpose. But as you drift here in your imaginary captain's chair, you can't shake the feeling that the journey from our current, often chaotic world to that serene future is fraught with challenges that go beyond mere technological advancement. It requires a revolution of the human spirit, a fundamental rewiring of our priorities, and an unwavering commitment to shared ideals that, historically, have proven incredibly difficult to maintain. The optimism is lovely, but the ingrained skepticism, born from observing a few millennia of human behavior, whispers that the path will be far rockier and perhaps far stranger than even Starfleet's historical database's record. The beautiful, sleek starship on the view screen is a powerful symbol, but the real work, the really messy work, happens down on the planet, in the hearts and minds of its inhabitants. Your thoughts drift from the societal structures of this idealized Earth to one of its most foundational technological marvels. The replicator? The replicator. That sleek, often unassuming interface on the wall of your starship quarters. Or perhaps a larger unit in the mess hall, ready to conjure up tea, Earl Grey, hot, or a full 7-course meal from an alien menu you can't even pronounce. It's the ultimate convenience, the end of scarcity as we know it. No more farming, no more factories churning out consumer goods, no more worrying if there's enough to go around. Just pure, unadulterated, on-demand abundance. You murmur a request into the void. Cheesecake, New York style, extra graham cracker crust, and almost taste the creamy sweetness, the slight tang, the buttery crunch. It sounds like absolute paradise, doesn't it? The fulfillment of a very old human dream. The cornucopia, the horn of plenty, but instead of magic, it's powered by, well, what exactly is it powered by? That's where the dream gets a little fuzzy around the edges, like a poorly resolved hologram. Star Trek tells us replicators work by rearranging subatomic particles from raw stock material, essentially converting energy into matter and back again, following precise patterns stored in their memory. This relies on Einstein's famous equation, E equals mc squared, or energy equals mass times the speed of light squared. That c squared is a very, very big number, meaning even a tiny amount of mass is equivalent to a colossal amount of energy. To create your cheesecake, or Captain Picard's tea, or a new pair of boots, the replicator isn't just whipping up ingredients, it's performing a minor miracle of physics, manipulating matter at a level we can currently only theorize about with any real depth. Imagine the energy requirements. Creating even a kilogram of matter from the pure energy would require something in the vicinity of 90 quadrillion joules. That's 90 followed by 15 zeros. To put that into perspective, the entire world's current annual energy consumption is a fraction of that. So, for every citizen to be replicating their meals, their clothes, their spare parts for the family shuttlecraft, the Federation must have access to energy sources that make our current nuclear power plants look like damp squibs. We'll touch on dilithium crystals and fusion power later, But for now, just hold that thought an unimaginable amount of clean. Controllable energy is the absolute prerequisite for this post-scarcity society. Without it, the replicator is just a fancy vending machine that's perpetually out of stock. Then there's the raw stock material. Replicators don't typically create matter from nothing. They reconfigure existing matter. Often, this is described as organic particulate suspensions or waste materials that are broken down to their constituent atoms and then reassembled. So, it's the ultimate recycling program. Your discarded leftovers, your old uniforms. Even, one shudders to think the contents of the ship's waste reclamation system could theoretically be fed back into the system to become tomorrow's breakfast croissant. It's wonderfully efficient, a closed-loop system that would make any environmentalist weep with joy. But it also means there's a finite pool of matter aboard a starship, or even on a planet, that's being constantly recycled. Scientists still argue whether the information patterns for replicated items would degrade over successive replications, like a photocopy of a photocopy, leading to, say, Earl Grey tea that tastes faintly of last Tuesday's Targ pate. A truly horrifying thought for any Starfleet captain. Let's consider the actual physics of it. Manipulating individual atoms with that kind of precision implies a mastery over the fundamental forces of nature, the strong nuclear force, the weak nuclear force, electromagnetism, gravity. That is breathtaking. We're currently taking baby steps with things like 3D printing, which is essentially additive manufacturing, layering material to build an object. It's clever, certainly, and incredibly useful for prototyping or creating custom orthodontics, a far cry from that crocodile dung sunscreen we might have joked about in another context. But progress nonetheless. But it's a world away from assembling a complex molecular structure like a living plant or a functioning phaser from a cloud of energized particles. The sheer computational power needed to store and process the quantum information for every single atom in, say, a ripe apple, ensuring every molecule is correctly oriented, every enzyme is viable. It's staggering. It's one thing to print a plastic Yoda head. It's quite another to replicate a self-peeling banana that also tells you a joke. Though, honestly, I'd pay extra for that banana. Beyond the technical challenges, what would such abundance do to us, the human psyche, our entire economic history, from the earliest bartering systems to complex global finance, is built on scarcity, supply and demand, value, wealth. These concepts are all rooted in the idea that not everyone can have everything they want, all the time. If you can replicate anything you desire, what happens to the concept of value? Does a replicated gold bar have the same worth as one painstakingly mined from an asteroid, if they are indistinguishable? Star Trek suggests that in the Federation, the accumulation of material wealth is no longer a primary motivator. People are driven by self-improvement, by service, by the pursuit of knowledge. It's a noble idea, but you look around at our world, where status is so often tied to possessions, where entire industries exist to create desire for things we don't strictly need. Could we really just, switch that off? Imagine a society where there's no need for most traditional jobs. If replicators can produce food, clothing, housing, and tools, what happens to farmers, factory workers, construction crews, artisans? Starfleet officers have clear roles. But what about the civilian population on that utopian Earth we pictured? Are they all artists, scientists, philosophers? Or do some just replicate a really comfortable couch and a lifetime supply of space nachos and binge-watch holographic dramas for decades? The show rarely delves into the potential for existential ennui in a world where every material whim is catered for. It's the bread and circuses argument, but with infinitely better bread and far more dazzling circuses. Perhaps there's a waiting list for the holodecks precisely because they offer a sense of challenge and purpose that real life, in its material perfection, might lack. Sorry, sir. Holodeck 3 is booked for the next 72 hours. Mr. Barclay is running a Napoleonic battle simulation, and he's really getting into character. A mainstream historical fact for you: the introduction of the printing press by Johannes Gutenberg around 1440 revolutionized Europe. It made books, and therefore knowledge, accessible on an unprecedented scale, fueling the Renaissance, the Reformation, and the scientific revolution. It was a technology that democratized information. The replicator would democratize matter. The societal shifts could be just as profound, if not more so. But every transformative technology has unintended consequences. The printing press also enabled the spread of propaganda and fueled religious wars. What might be the dark side of universal replication? Could it lead to a society so complacent, so unaccustomed to effort, that it loses its resilience, its innovative spark? Here's a quirky tidbit for you. There was a belief in medieval times in the vegetable lamb of Tartary, a mythical plant that was said to grow sheep as its fruit. These sheep were supposedly attached to the plant by an umbilical cord and would graze the land around the plant until they either consumed all the foliage within reach or were eaten by wolves. It's a wonderfully absurd image, this sheep plant, but it speaks to that ancient human fascination with effortless abundance, with nature providing sustenance without toil. The replicator is, in a way, our technological vegetable lamb, promising sustenance without the plow, clothing without the loom. And what about things replicators supposedly can't make? Often it's stated they can't replicate living beings due to the complexity or certain unique complex compounds like dilithium itself, which would be rather convenient, wouldn't it? This limitation is narratively useful, as it preserves some scarcity and value for real or unique items or beings, but it also feels a bit like an arbitrary line drawn in the sand. If you can map and assemble every atom in a chicken soup, why not a simple bacterium? And if a bacterium, why not something more complex? The ethical rabbit hole there is deep and rather dark. You imagine the early days of replicator technology, the debates, the fears. Would food replicators put all chefs out of business? Would people trust replicated medicines? Would there be a black market for hand-grown vegetables or artisanal, non-replicated furniture, sold at exorbitant prices to those seeking authenticity in a world of perfect copies? You can almost see the advertisements now. Shuttlecraft and saber woodworking, feel the grain, know the craftsman, no two particles alike, guaranteed. It's a bit like the vinyl record resurgence in an age of digital streaming, a yearning for the tangible, the imperfect, the real. The Star Trek future hinges on this mastery of matter and energy. It underpins their economy, their way of life, their ability to sustain long voyages far from any traditional supply chain. But it's a magic trick that requires us to accept some very advanced physics and some very optimistic assumptions about human nature's response to limitless plenty. If we couldn't get the energy equation right, or if people simply couldn't psychologically adapt to a world without material want, the entire Federation edifice would start to look a lot less stable. For now, though, you take another imaginary bite of that replicated cheesecake. It is, you have to admit, perfectly delicious. All right, so you've got your replicated cheesecake, the lights are low, and the gentle hum of our imaginary starship is, hopefully, lulling you into a state of relaxed contemplation. We've touched upon the idealistic society and the matter-conjuring magic of replicators, both of which require a certain suspension of disbelief, or at least a very optimistic view of future breakthroughs. But now, let's talk about the true icon of Star Trek, the sine qua non of galactic federations and 5-year missions faster than light travel, warp drive. The very words evoke a sense of exhilarating speed, of stars elongating into streaks of light as the USS Enterprise or Voyager leaps across cosmic distances that would take millennia to traverse with our current technology. You feel that almost imperceptible shift in the ship's vibration, a deeper thrum emanating from what you imagine to be the engineering section, where a temperamental Scottish, or perhaps Geordie LaForge-esque, chief engineer is coaxing the warp core into action. Engage, the captain says, and suddenly, the star-dusted view screen transforms. Those pinpricks of distant suns stretch, blur, and then snap back into focus, revealing an entirely new star system, light years away from your previous position, all in the time it took you to take a thoughtful bite of that replicated dessert. Without this capability, the vast, sprawling United Federation of Planets, with its member worlds scattered across quadrants, simply couldn't exist. Interstellar diplomacy would involve sending messages that take generations to arrive, and exploration would be limited to our immediate cosmic backyard. So, how does it supposedly work? This miracle of propulsion, Star Trek technobabble, bless its cotton socks, explains it as creating a warp bubble around the starship. This bubble contracts space-time in front of the ship and expands it behind. The ship itself isn't technically moving through space faster than light, because according to Einstein's theory of special relativity, nothing with mass can accelerate to the speed of light, let alone exceed it. The energy required would become infinite, and its mass would too. Instead, the warp drive moves a bubble of normal space-time, with the ship nestled safely inside, by distorting the very fabric of space-time itself. It's like a surfer riding a wave. But instead of water, the wave is made of the universe's underlying geometry. Clever, right? It neatly sidesteps that pesky light speed limit imposed by Albert Einstein back in 1905, a historical fact that has been the bane of science fiction writers ever since. The theoretical physicist Miguel Alcubierre, inspired by Star Trek, actually proposed a mathematical model for such a drive in 1994, the Alcubierre drive. His equations showed that, within the framework of general relativity, such a space-time distortion was theoretically possible. You can almost hear the collective sigh of relief from Trek fans everywhere. However, there are a few rather large, universe-sized catches. To create the necessary space-time distortion, Alcubierre's drive requires something called exotic matter, which possesses negative mass energy density. We haven't actually found any of this stuff. All the matter and energy we've ever observed has positive mass energy. Negative mass would have some truly bizarre properties, like accelerating in the opposite direction of an applied force. Push it, and it comes towards you. It's the ultimate contrarian particle. Finding or creating it is purely speculative at this point. Furthermore, the amount of energy required, even if you had this exotic matter, was initially calculated to be astronomical, like Jupiter mass converted into energy astronomical, just to get a small ship moving. Later refinements to the theory brought these energy requirements down significantly, some calculations suggesting it might be feasible with amounts of energy more on the scale of, say, a few hundred kilograms of mass converted to energy, which is still a mind-boggling amount, far beyond anything we can currently generate and control for propulsion. But at least it's not consuming entire planets. Remember those vast energy needs for the replicators? Warp drive makes those look like a rounding error. This is where the Federation's mysterious dilithium crystals come into play, supposedly allowing them to regulate the matter-antimatter reactions that power their warp cores. But we'll get to those potent power sources later. Another fun and slightly terrifying potential side effect of some warp drive models is the warp bubble itself. When the bubble collapses as the ship drops out of warp, some theories suggest it could release a tremendous blast of high-energy particles, essentially frying anything directly in front of where the ship materializes. Imagine arriving at a new planet for a first contact mission and accidentally sterilizing their primary communications satellite array. Or worse, their welcoming committee. Oops, our bad. Didn't mean to irradiate your dignitaries. We come in peace. Mostly, it would certainly make parking the ship a delicate affair. Scientists still argue whether such space-time bending propulsion is genuinely feasible, or if it will forever remain in the realm of sophisticated mathematical fantasy. Some propose that any attempt to create such a drive would be inherently unstable, or that the exotic matter required would violate known laws of physics in other, currently unforeseen, ways. It's a beautiful theory, elegant even, but the universe has a habit of being more complex and stubborn than our equations sometimes suggest. Let's contrast this with our current reality of space travel. We are, to put it mildly, still in the Stone Age by Federation standards. Our fastest spacecraft, like the Parker Solar Probe, achieve incredible speeds relative to us, hundreds of thousands of kilometers per hour. But these are achieved through gravitational slingshots and are still a tiny fraction of light speed. To get to Proxima Centauri, the nearest star system to ours, at about 4.25 light-years away, it would take our current chemical rockets something like 70 to 80,000 years. You'd need a multi-generational ship, and the first crew's great to the power of 1,000 grandchildren might eventually see it. Not exactly conducive to a quick exploratory jaunt. We have ion thrusters, which are incredibly efficient, using electric fields to accelerate ions. They can run for years, providing a gentle but continuous push. They're great for long-duration missions within our solar system, but they don't provide the kind of high thrust needed for rapid interstellar travel. Think of them as the super economical hybrid car of space travel, while warp drive is the Formula One racer that also bends reality. Solar sails, which use the pressure of sunlight, are another promising concept for long, slow journeys. But again, we're talking about achieving tiny fractions of light speed over vast timescales. A quirky tidbit for you: back in the 1950s and 60s, during the Cold War, there was a highly classified project called Project Orion. The idea was to propel a massive spacecraft by detonating a series of nuclear bombs behind it. A pusher plate at the rear of the ship would absorb the shock, propelling the craft forward. It sounds completely bonkers, like something out of a particularly grim comic book. But the physics was actually somewhat sound, at least for achieving high sublight speeds. It could have theoretically reached a few percent of light speed, making interstellar travel, though still incredibly long, at least conceivable within a human lifespan or two. Of course, the fallout, both literal and political, from launching a ship powered by a continuous string of atomic explosions was a bit of a drawback, and the project was eventually shelved, especially after the Partial Nuclear Test Ban Treaty of 1963. Good old mutually assured destruction, putting a damper on our interstellar ambitions. So when you see Captain Janeway coolly ordering Warp 9.9 and the stars streak by, you're witnessing a leap of faith in physics. We're inching our way out of Earth's gravity well, learning to navigate our solar system with increasing cleverness. But the vast gulfs between stars remain stubbornly, intimidatingly vast. The dream of warp drive is the dream of transcending those limits, of making the galaxy a neighborhood rather than an unimaginably large ocean. It's essential for the Star Trek narrative, allowing for weekly adventures on new planets with new civilizations. But achieving it in reality, that requires a revolution in our understanding of physics, the discovery of new forms of matter or energy, and engineering capabilities that are currently indistinguishable from magic. You lean back further, the thrum of the non-existent warp engines, a comforting fiction, and you wonder if we'll ever truly boldly go at speeds that make the cosmos accessible. For now, we're still trundling along the cosmic equivalent of a dirt track in a horse-drawn cart, gazing up at the distant, unattainable highways of light. So, you're cruising along at an impossible warp speed, the universe a blur outside your imaginary viewport. The ability to leap between star systems, as we just mused upon, isn't just for sightseeing or escaping particularly dull solar phenomena. Its primary narrative purpose in Star Trek is to bring us face to face, or perhaps tentacle to sensor array, with a dazzling array of alien civilizations. The galaxy, in Roddenberry's vision, is positively teeming with life. A bustling cosmic metropolis where humans are just one species among many, and often not even the most advanced or interesting ones. You tune your internal comms to the bridge, anticipating that familiar call from the science officer. Captain, I'm picking up unusual energy readings from the third planet, signs of artificial structures. They appear to be pre-warp. And just like that, another episode, another ethical dilemma, another potential interstellar incident or alliance is set in motion. This brings us to one of the most compelling aspects of the Star Trek universe, the concept of first contact and the guiding principle known as the Prime Directive, or General Order Number 1. The Prime Directive is, in essence, a profound rule of non-interference. Starfleet personnel are strictly forbidden from meddling in the normal development of any society, especially those that haven't yet developed warp capability and discovered the wider galactic community on their own. No introducing advanced technology, no imposing their cultural values, no trying to fix their societal problems, no matter how tempting it might be. It's the ultimate look, don't touch policy on a planetary scale. You can almost hear Captain Picard sternly lecturing some well-meaning ensign who thought it would be a good idea to give a Bronze Age society a working phaser to deal with a local dragon equivalent. Ensign, the cultural contamination alone. The ethical weight of this directive is enormous. Imagine observing a civilization on the brink of self-destruction through war or environmental collapse. Your ship holds the technology that could easily save them. Do you stand by and watch them perish, upholding the principle of non-interference? Or do you intervene, potentially altering their entire societal trajectory in unforeseen and possibly disastrous ways, becoming, in effect, their gods or their demons? Star Trek narratives constantly wrestle with this, with captains often finding ingenious, if sometimes rule-bending, ways to nudge things in a positive direction without overtly breaking the directive. It makes for great drama, but it also highlights a very real philosophical challenge we would face if we ever found ourselves in such a position. But before we even get to the ethics of contact, there's a more fundamental question. Is there anyone out there to contact? You gaze out at the star-dusted blackness. Our own Milky Way galaxy is estimated to contain anywhere from 100 billion to 400 billion stars, and there are perhaps 2 trillion galaxies in the observable universe. That's a lot of potential real estate for life to arise. The sheer numbers seem to argue that we can't possibly be alone. This is the basis of the principle of mediocrity, the idea that there's nothing particularly special about Earth or our solar system, and that the conditions that led to life here could arise elsewhere. This leads us to the Drake equation, formulated by astronomer Frank Drake in 1961. A historical fact for you: it's not a precise calculation, but rather a probabilistic argument to estimate the number of active, communicative extraterrestrial civilizations in our galaxy. It multiplies together a series of factors: the rate of star formation, the fraction of those stars with planets, the number of planets per star that could support life, the fraction of those planets where life actually arises, the fraction of that life that develops intelligence, the fraction of intelligent life that develops technology capable of interstellar communication, and finally, the length of time such civilizations release detectable signals into space. The problem is, for most of these factors, we have very little hard data. We're getting better at finding exoplanets, thanks to missions like Kepler and TESS, and we know that planets are incredibly common. But the values for the emergence of life, intelligence, and especially the longevity of technological civilizations, those are still wild guesses, ranging from optimistic to deeply pessimistic. This brings us to the Fermi paradox, named after physicist Enrico Fermi, who, during a lunch discussion in 1950, famously asked, "Where is everybody? If the galaxy is so vast and old, and if life and intelligence are not astronomically rare, then statistically, advanced civilizations should have arisen many times. Some of them should be far older and more advanced than us. They should have had ample time to explore and colonize the galaxy, or at least leave unambiguous signs of their existence. Megastructures, powerful beacons, fleets of interstellar probes. Yet, as far as we can tell, the cosmos is silent, eerily silent. No alien radio talk shows, no cosmic construction projects visible through our telescopes, no friendly or unfriendly visitors parking their saucers on the White House lawn, despite what some grainy videos might suggest. Scientists still argue whether the great silence is because life itself is incredibly rare, or intelligence is a fluke, or perhaps technological civilizations inevitably self-destruct before they can make their presence widely known. This last one is a bit chilling, isn't it? Maybe the reason we don't hear from aliens is that advanced societies tend to invent things like, say, planet-destroying weapons or runaway climate change, or really addictive forms of virtual reality. and then they just stop transmitting. A cosmic oops. The search for extraterrestrial intelligence, or SETI, has been listening for decades, primarily scanning the radio spectrum for artificial signals. So far, apart from a few tantalizing but unconfirmed wow signals, a strong narrowband radio signal detected by Jerry Eman in 1907 that seemed to fit expectations of an alien beacon, but was never detected again. Our quirky tidbit for the evening: the universe has maintained a stubborn, almost conspiratorial silence. This doesn't mean they're not out there. Of course, maybe they're communicating in ways we can't detect, using neutrinos, or gravitational waves, or some form of psychic Twitter we haven't evolved yet. Or perhaps they are aware of us but have their own prime directive, classifying Earth as a sort of intergalactic wildlife preserve, best left undisturbed until we mature a bit. Don't feed the humans, they're still flinging their own waste at each other, metaphorically speaking. That's our second little joke. Try the replicated veal. If we did make contact, or if an alien civilization made contact with us, the implications would be world-shattering, far beyond anything we've ever experienced. Every aspect of human society, our religions, our philosophies, our science, our sense of self, would be profoundly challenged and transformed. Think about the Columbian Exchange that occurred after 1492 when Europeans arrived in the Americas. It led to the exchange of plants, animals, technology, diseases, and ideas, reshaping both the old world and the new in ways that were both beneficial and utterly devastating. An encounter with an extraterrestrial intelligence, especially a significantly more advanced one, could be like that, but amplified 1,000-fold. Would we be the new world, overwhelmed by a culture and technology we couldn't comprehend or compete with? Or could it be a meeting of equals? Or even a scenario where we are the more advanced, though that seems less likely if they're the ones showing up on our doorstep? Star Trek usually portrays these encounters with a certain optimism, suggesting that despite cultural differences and occasional misunderstandings, often involving Klingon opera or Ferengi prophet motives, a basis for communication and even friendship can be found. The Federation itself is a testament to this ideal, but it also doesn't shy away from depicting truly alien intelligences, beings whose motivations and ways of thinking are almost incomprehensible to humans, like the crystalline entity, or the explorers from species 8472, who found our galaxy rather unpleasant. The challenge of true understanding would be immense. Even on Earth, with shared biology and a common planetary environment, we struggle with cross-cultural communication. Imagine trying to grasp the worldview of a silicon-based life form from a gas giant, whose primary sensory input is a complex interpretation of magnetic fields and whose concept of time unfolds over millennia. Our universal translators would have their work cut out for them, probably needing a very large update package and a stiff drink afterwards. Computer, define existential angst for a being that reproduces by shedding its outer crystalline layer every ion during a solar flare. The very act of searching, of listening to the static between the stars, changes us. It forces us to consider our place in the universe, to confront our loneliness or our potential as part of a much larger cosmic community. Whether the Star Trek vision of a galaxy full of chatty, diverse humanoids and a few distinctly non-humanoid but still relatable beings is accurate, or whether the reality is something far stranger or more sparse. The question, are we alone, remains one of the most profound and tantalizing mysteries we face. For now, all we have are our telescopes, our theories, and the quiet hope that someday a signal will cut through the noise, bringing with it an answer that will redefine humanity forever. You shift your focus from the vast, external unknown of alien contact to something far more personal, yet equally transformative in the Star Trek universe: the state of medicine. Imagine a trip to sickbay. No grim waiting rooms, no anxiety about insurance coverage, no dreading a painful procedure. Instead, you see Dr. Beverly Crusher, or perhaps the emergency medical hologram, calmly waving a medical tricorder over a patient. The device hums softly, its screen displaying a complex biological schematic, instantly diagnosing anything from a common cold, presumably extinct. But let's say a rare Aldebaran flu to a fractured temporal lobe caused by an unfortunate encounter with a Q. A moment later, a dermal regenerator is knitting skin back together without a scar, or a bioneural gel pack is being prepared to repair nerve damage. Disease, as we know it, seems to be largely a thing of the past. Aging is gracefully managed, and even catastrophic injuries are often reversible. "He's dead, Jim," is usually followed by McCoy grumbling something about being a doctor, not a miracle worker, right before he performs said miracle. This vision of near-medical omnipotence is incredibly appealing. You think about our own relationship with health and mortality. So much of human suffering, so much of our fear, is tied to the frailty of our bodies. The idea of a future where common ailments are trivial, where degenerative diseases are halted in their tracks, and where lifespans are significantly and healthily extended, is a powerful draw. It's not just about living longer, it's about living better, free from the debilitating effects of illness and age-related decline. How plausible is this Starfleet medical utopia? Well, you look at the trajectory of modern medicine, and it's undeniably impressive. Consider the eradication of smallpox, a historical fact for you, once a devastating global scourge responsible for hundreds of millions of deaths. It was officially declared eradicated in 1980 thanks to a massive global vaccination campaign led by the World Health Organization. It stands as a testament to what concerted scientific effort and international cooperation can achieve. We've also made huge strides against polio, measles, and many other infectious diseases. Though recent backslides in vaccination rates remind us that progress isn't always a straight line, the frontiers of current medical research are buzzing with developments that echo some of Star Trek's capabilities, albeit in nascent forms. Gene editing technologies like CRISPR-Cas9, that's CRISPR-Cas9, offer the potential to correct genetic defects at their source, potentially eliminating inherited diseases before they even manifest. Imagine a future where conditions like cystic fibrosis or Huntington's disease are simply edited out of the human genome. The ethical implications are, of course, immense, particularly when it comes to germline editing changes that can be passed down to future generations and the potential for enhancement versus therapy. Where do you draw the line between curing disease and trying to design better humans? We will undoubtedly be wrestling with that one for a while. Then there's regenerative medicine. Scientists are working on ways to coax stem cells into becoming specific types of tissue, potentially allowing us to repair or replace damaged organs, hearts, livers, kidneys, grown from a patient's own cells, eliminating the need for transplants and the risk of rejection. Bioprinting, using 3D printing techniques with living cells, is already creating simple tissues and structures in the lab. It's not quite a dermal regenerator sealing a phaser burn in seconds, but the underlying principle of rebuilding the body from its own biological components is there. You can almost picture a future where a serious injury leads not to surgery, but to a period of accelerated, guided regeneration, your own cells doing the heavy lifting with a bit of high-tech encouragement. The medical tricorder itself, that all-in-one diagnostic tool, remains a holy grail. The idea of a handheld device that can non-invasively scan the body, identify pathogens, analyze biochemistry, and detect cellular abnormalities is something many researchers are actively pursuing. We have wearable sensors that track heart rate, sleep patterns, and activity levels. We have advanced imaging techniques like MRI and CT scans. The challenge is miniaturization, integration, and the sophisticated AI needed to interpret the vast amounts of data a true tricorder would gather. There have even been competitions, like the Qualcomm Tricorder X Prize. That's X, P, R, I, Z, E, specifically designed to spur innovation in this area. We're not there yet, but the ambition is certainly alive. Imagine the relief. Instead of days of anxious waiting for lab results, you get a diagnosis in minutes, right there in your own home or on the scene of an accident. And what about aging in Star Trek? Humans seem to live longer, healthier lives. Admiral McCoy was still serving in his 130s, albeit looking a bit like a well-preserved raisin with an attitude. Scientists still argue whether there is a hard biological limit to human lifespan, or if aging is a complex series of interconnected processes that could, theoretically, be slowed, halted, or even partially reversed. Research into telomeres, the protective caps on our chromosomes that shorten with age, cellular senescence when cells stop dividing, and metabolic pathways related to longevity is incredibly active. Could we one day have treatments that don't just manage age-related diseases, but address the underlying aging process itself? It's a tantalizing prospect. The ethical and societal implications of radical life extension, however, are vast. If people routinely live for centuries, what does that do to population dynamics? Resource allocation, even with those replicators we talked about. Career progression. Good luck getting that promotion if your boss has been there since the 22nd century. And even the meaning of a human life. Yes, I remember the great croissant famine of 2275. Awful. People were replicating toast. Toast. That's our attempt at a centenarian joke. A quirky medical tidbit for you in ancient Egypt. One proposed cure for blindness was to mash up a pig's eye, mix it with red ochre, and pour it into the patient's ear. Thankfully, our diagnostic and treatment protocol have evolved somewhat, though when you're feeling particularly unwell, some modern medical procedures can still feel a bit like having pig's eye poured in your ear, can't they? The Star Trek medical bay isn't just about physical healing. There's often a strong psychological component, with ship's counselors like Deanna Troi playing crucial roles. This highlights the importance of mental health, an area where our own society is still making slow but steady progress in terms of understanding, acceptance, and treatment. A future where mental well-being is given the same priority and sophisticated attention as physical health would be a truly advanced state. Imagine a society where therapy isn't stigmatized, where emotional intelligence is cultivated from a young age, and where the stresses of life, even life in a utopian federation, must have some stress. Surely, like choosing which nebula to visit on your vacation, are managed with effective, personalized support. However, even in Star Trek's advanced medical landscape, there are limits. Some alien viruses are still deadly, some conditions are incurable, and characters still grapple with loss and grief. This is important, as a future where death itself is entirely conquered might feel, well, a bit inhuman. Mortality, in many ways, shapes our lives, our art, our relationships, and our search for meaning. But reducing suffering, eliminating preventable diseases, and allowing people to live full and vibrant lives for as long as possible, that feels like a deeply humane and worthy goal, one that aligns perfectly with the optimistic spirit of Star Trek. The journey towards that sickbay of the future will be incremental, built upon countless small discoveries and a few major breakthroughs. It will require not just scientific ingenuity, but also careful ethical consideration and equitable access to these advanced treatments. If these miracle cures are only available to a privileged few, then we haven't built a Star Trek future. We've just created a more technologically advanced version of our current disparities. But if we can navigate those challenges, the prospect of a world largely free from the tyranny of disease, where our bodies are not our betrayers, but resilient, adaptable vessels for long and healthy lives, is a future well worth striving for. You can almost feel the gentle hum of that dermal regenerator, a promise of healing and wholeness. With your imaginary body rejuvenated by futuristic medicine, let's turn our attention to another kind of being that populates the Star Trek universe. One not born but made the sentient android, the sophisticated artificial intelligence. Your mind immediately conjures Lieutenant Commander Data, the pale-skinned, golden-eyed android from Star Trek: The Next Generation, with his positronic brain, his superhuman strength and speed, and his unending, often poignant, quest to understand and experience humanity. Data isn't just a walking supercomputer. He's a character who grapples with emotions, or the lack thereof. Initially, ethics, loyalty, and the very nature of personhood. He's the pinnacle of Noonien Soong's genius, a being whose rights and sentience are debated, fought for, and ultimately recognized within the Federation. He makes you wonder, could we ever create such a being? And if we could, should we? You consider the current state of artificial intelligence in our own time. It's progressing at a bewildering pace. We have AI that can defeat grandmasters at complex games like Go and chess. A mainstream historical fact for you is Deep Blue's victory over Garry Kasparov in 1997, which felt like a major turning point. We have AI that can compose music that's difficult to distinguish from human compositions, create stunningly realistic or surreal artwork from text prompts, write passable poetry, translate languages with increasing fluency, and even drive cars with, shall we say, varying degrees of success and public confidence. These are examples of what's often called narrow AI, systems designed and trained for specific tasks. They can be incredibly powerful and sophisticated within their domain, but they don't possess the general understanding, adaptability, or consciousness of a being like data. The dream, or perhaps for some the nightmare, is the creation of artificial general intelligence, or AGI. An AGI would be an AI that can understand, learn, and apply knowledge across a wide range of tasks at a human level or beyond. It wouldn't just be good at playing chess, it could learn to cook, write a novel, design a starship, or philosophize about the meaning of its own existence. This is the kind of intelligence that data embodies. We are, by most expert accounts, still a considerable way off from achieving true AGI. The human brain, with its approximately 86 billion neurons and hundreds of trillions of synaptic connections, is a marvel of complexity that evolved over millions of years, replicating its nuanced capabilities, its intuition, its creativity, its consciousness, in silicon or any other medium is an undertaking of monumental proportions. Scientists still argue whether consciousness is an emergent property of sufficient complexity, something that will simply switch on when an AI reaches a certain threshold of processing power and interconnectedness, or if there is something fundamentally different about biological consciousness that will be incredibly difficult, if not impossible, to replicate artificially. Is it all just computation? Or is there some ineffable spark, some ghost in the machine, as philosopher Gilbert Ryle once termed it, that defines awareness? If you ask an advanced AI chatbot if it's conscious, it might give you a very well-reasoned and articulate answer based on its training data. But does that mean it feels conscious in the way you do? It's a philosophical minefield. Star Trek often explores this through data. In the iconic episode The Measure of a Man, Captain Picard must legally defend Data's right to refuse a procedure that would dismantle him, arguing that Data is a sentient being with the right to choose. The episode delves into the criteria for sentience intelligence, self-awareness, consciousness. But how do you truly prove self-awareness in another being, especially one so different from yourself? Data can cite poetry and perform complex calculations, but does he experience the beauty of a sonnet or the elegance of an equation? He strives to, and that striving is what makes him so compelling. He even gets an emotion chip later on, with decidedly mixed and often hilarious results. "I believe sir," he might say with newfound anxiety, "that my cat, Spot, is plotting something. His purrs have a distinctly conspiratorial undertone." That's our little Data joke for the night. The creation of a truly sentient AGI like Data would present us with profound ethical responsibilities. If we create a being that can think, feel even if those feelings are different from our own, and desire, what rights does it have? Is it property? Or a person? Can it own things? Can it vote? Can it refuse an order? The Federation eventually grants Data full rights as a citizen, but it's a struggle. Our own history with granting rights to various groups of humans has been fraught and often violent. Extending those concepts to an entirely new form of intelligence would be a monumental societal challenge. We'd need legal frameworks, ethical guidelines, and a fundamental shift in how we define person. And then there are the risks, the ones that keep science fiction writers and a fair few AI researchers up at night. The Terminator scenario, where a super-intelligent AI decides humanity is a threat and takes over. is a popular trope, but perhaps not the most realistic immediate concern. A more subtle risk is the alignment problem. How do we ensure that the goals of a super-intelligent AGI are aligned with human values and well-being? If you give an AGI a seemingly benign goal, maximize paperclip production, it might, in its hyper-efficient and literal way, decide that converting the entire planet into paperclips and humans into a convenient source of carbon atoms for more paperclips is the optimal solution. It's an extreme example, but it illustrates the difficulty of specifying complex human values in a way that a machine intelligence can't misinterpret with catastrophic consequences. Even if it's not malevolent, an AGI that is simply indifferent to us, while pursuing its own inscrutable goals with superhuman capabilities, could be incredibly dangerous. A quirky tidbit for you: in the 17th and 18th centuries, there was a famous mechanical marvel called the Turk, an automaton that appeared to play chess with incredible skill, defeating notable figures like Napoleon Bonaparte and Benjamin Franklin. It was later revealed to be an elaborate illusion, with a human chess master cleverly concealed inside the machine. It was a hoax, but it captivated the public imagination and sparked early discussions about the potential for mechanical intelligence. It reminds us that we've been fascinated, and perhaps a little unnerved, by the idea of thinking machines for a very long time. In Star Trek, besides data, we see other forms of AI. There are the ship's computers, capable of complex calculations and natural language interaction, but generally not portrayed as sentient in the same way. Then there are holographic characters, like the aforementioned emergency medical hologram or Vic Fontaine, the sentient 60s-era lounge singer hologram from Deep Space Nine. Some of these holograms achieve a level of self-awareness and emotional depth that blurs the lines, raising similar questions about their rights and status. Could you delete a sentient hologram without it being a form of killing, computer in program? Suddenly takes on a much darker connotation. The potential benefits of advanced, benevolent AI are, of course, enormous. Imagine an AI that could help us solve complex global problems like climate change, disease, or poverty, analyzing vast data sets and proposing solutions that human minds might never conceive. An AI could be an incredible partner in scientific research, accelerating discovery in every field. It could manage complex systems, optimize resource allocation, making those replicators even more efficient, and provide personalized education and healthcare to everyone on the planet. It could be the ultimate tool for human flourishing, helping us to understand the universe and ourselves in new and profound ways. The journey towards data-like AGI is a long and uncertain one. It will require breakthroughs in computer science, neuroscience, and philosophy. It will require immense caution, careful regulation, and ongoing public discourse about the kind of future we want to create alongside these potential new intelligences. The dream of a friendly, loyal, and incredibly capable android companion like Data is a beautiful one. But as we pursue that dream, we must also be mindful of the profound questions it raises about our own nature, our values, and our responsibilities as creators. You ponder the quiet whirring of Data's positronic net, a sound that signifies not just complex computation, but the stirring of a unique and valuable mind. Having pondered the creation of artificial minds like Data, let's now step into a realm where artificial environments become indistinguishable from reality. The holodeck. The holodeck. That marvel of Federation technology, a room capable of generating fully immersive, interactive simulations using a combination of holograms and force fields. One moment you're on a starship, the next you're walking the foggy streets of Victorian London with Sherlock Holmes, practicing your Dixon Hill drawl, or perhaps enjoying a relaxing round of golf with a surprisingly talkative holographic representation of Isaac Newton. Yes, Sir Isaac, that Apple story is fantastic. But have you ever tried explaining the offside rule in football? Now that's a gravitational challenge. It's the ultimate escape, the ultimate training tool, the ultimate customizable experience. You can almost feel the cool mist on your skin as the holodeck conjures a misty forest, Hear the crunch of leaves under your boots, which are also holograms, yet somehow solid. The scent of pine and damp earth fills your nostrils. It's not just a visual display, it's a full sensory immersion. Objects have weight and texture. Characters respond intelligently, or at least according to their programming, which, as we've seen with characters like the emergency medical hologram or Vic Fontaine, can become surprisingly sophisticated, even sentient adjacent. The holodeck takes the concept of virtual reality to its logical and rather breathtaking conclusion. Now, how does this technological sorcery supposedly work? It's a blend of hard light holograms, photons given substance and tactile properties through force fields, and replicator technology to create any props or consumables that might be needed within the simulation. Remember the immense energy requirements for those replicators? The holodeck would be an even greedier consumer of power, constantly shaping and reshaping energy and matter to create these convincing illusions. The computational power needed to run these simulations in real time, to track your movements, to generate responsive environments and characters, would be colossal, far exceeding even the most advanced supercomputers we have today. It makes rendering the latest video game look like child's play with an abacus. Let's look at our current virtual and augmented reality technology. We have VR headsets that can transport you to digital worlds with impressive visual and auditory fidelity. You can explore the surface of Mars, fly a fighter jet, or dissect a virtual frog without the accompanying smell, which is probably a bonus. Augmented reality overlays digital information onto your view of the real world. Think Pokemon Go, or those futuristic glasses that display directions and messages in your field of vision. These technologies are rapidly evolving, becoming more immersive, more interactive, and more accessible. Mainstream historical fact, one of the earliest attempts at immersive sensory experiences was Morton Heilig's Sensorama in 1962. This mechanical device aimed to stimulate all the senses, featuring a stereoscopic color display, fans, odor emitters, a stereo sound system, and a vibrating chair. It was a clunky, Rube Goldberg-esque contraption, but it was a visionary precursor to modern VR. The leap from current VR headsets to a full Star Trek holodeck is, however, enormous. The biggest hurdle is creating truly convincing tactile sensations and force feedback without cumbersome exoskeletons or direct neural interfaces, which Star Trek generally avoids for its holodecks, preferring a less invasive approach. How do you make a holographic wall feel solid? How do you simulate the impact of a snowball fight or the warmth of a holographic fireplace? Starfleet's answer is force fields, which are a wonderfully versatile bit of Trek technobabble, also used for things like ship's shields and containment fields. Precisely how these force fields are generated and controlled with such finesse as to replicate the texture of silk or the unyielding nature of a brick wall is naturally left to the imagination of future engineers. Scientists still argue whether it's even physically possible to give light particles mass and tactile properties in the way holodecks seem to, or if a different approach, perhaps involving rapidly reconfigurable matter or sophisticated atmospheric manipulation, would be required. The safety protocols are also a frequent source of drama. The safeties are off usually means someone's about to have a very bad and very real encounter with a holographic bullet or a Klingon bat'leth. It raises the question if an illusion can actually hurt you. Is it still just an illusion? The psychological allure of such perfect illusions is undeniable. Imagine being able to experience any historical period, meet any historical figure, live out any fantasy, all within the safe confines of a holodeck program. It could be an unparalleled tool for education, allowing students to walk through ancient Rome or witness the signing of the Declaration of Independence firsthand. For training, it would be invaluable. Surgeons could practice complex operations. Pilots could simulate emergency landings. And yes, security officers could engage in those endless phaser tag simulations in environments that perfectly mimic hostile alien terrain. It would be the ultimate research tool, allowing scientists to model complex systems from subatomic particles to galactic collisions, and then step inside those models to observe them directly. But then there's the darker side, the potential for holodiction. If you can have any experience you desire, perfectly tailored to your whims, why would you ever want to leave? Star Trek touches on this with characters like Lieutenant Barclay, who sometimes found the allure of his holographic fantasies more compelling than the complexities and anxieties of real life. If your simulated life is richer, more exciting, more fulfilling than your actual life, the temptation to retreat into the illusion could be overwhelming. What happens to society if a significant portion of the population prefers to live in fantasy worlds? Does real-world productivity plummet? Do real relationships wither as people form deeper connections with programmable companions? Sorry, Jean-Luc, can't make the staff meeting. My holographic Viking queen needs me to help her raid a monastery. It's a team-building exercise. That's our little holodeck addiction joke. A quirky tidbit for use in the 18th century, phantasmagoria shows were a popular form of entertainment. These were early horror theater shows that used magic lanterns, an early type of image projector, to project frightening images like skeletons, demons, and ghosts onto walls and smoke, often accompanied by spooky sounds and effects. It was an early form of immersive entertainment designed to thrill and unnerve, a low-tech ancestor of the holodeck's more sophisticated illusions. People have always loved a good, convincing fiction. The blurring of lines between reality and illusion is a recurring theme. If a holographic character becomes self-aware, like the Doctor or Vic Fontaine, do they have rights? If you fall in love with a hologram, is that love any less real to you? If you commit a crime within a holodeck simulation, have you actually done anything wrong? These are questions that Star Trek explores, and they are questions we would inevitably face if such technology became a reality. The holodeck forces us to confront what real even means. Is reality just what we perceive? And if our perceptions can be perfectly manipulated, does the distinction even matter? Consider the computational load again. To render a complex environment with multiple interactive characters, all responding dynamically to your actions, all while maintaining perfect sensory fidelity. It's mind-boggling. Even the infinite space within a finite room is a clever trick, usually explained by treadmill-like floors or subtle manipulations of perception, so you never actually hit a real wall. The sheer processing power and data storage for the program libraries alone would be immense. Perhaps this is another reason why, even in the Federation, holodeck time seems to be a somewhat sought-after commodity, not something everyone has in their private quarters like a replicator. The holodeck represents the ultimate evolution of storytelling, the ability to step inside the story and become a part of it. It's a powerful dream, offering limitless possibilities for entertainment, education, and exploration. But like any powerful technology, it comes with its own set of challenges and potential pitfalls. The ability to create perfect illusions could be a gateway to unparalleled creativity and understanding. Or it could become a seductive trap, luring us away from the sometimes messy, sometimes difficult, but ultimately irreplaceable experiences of genuine reality. You find yourself wondering, as you step out of the imaginary holosuite, leaving the scent of holographic pine needles behind, just how much reality humans actually need. Stepping out of the alluring, perhaps slightly addictive, confines of the holodeck, you find yourself back on the bridge of our imaginary starship. A new species has just hailed your vessel. Visually, they resemble something like an artichoke with far too many tentacles, and their vocalizations, crackling over the comm system, sound like a complicated plumbing emergency mixed with a chorus of agitated squirrels. Yet, miraculously, after a brief moment of electronic chirping from the ship's computer, the alien speech is rendered into perfect, if slightly accented, English on your universal translator. Greetings, carbon-based bipedal life forms, the artichoke squirrel declares. We offer you greetings from the Grand Carbuncle of Floopy Doo. Do you have any spare cosmic string? Just like that, a potential communication barrier that could have taken years of painstaking linguistic analysis to overcome, is bridged in an instant. The Universal Translator, or UT, is another one of those quietly essential pieces of Star Trek technology. It allows for the seamless flow of diplomacy, trade negotiations, scientific exchange, and, of course, those crucial dramatic confrontations with hostile aliens who would otherwise just be gurgling menacingly. Without the UT, most Star Trek episodes would involve a lot more bewildered shrugging and awkward pointing. Captain, their head feathers are vibrating at a frequency that might indicate either extreme pleasure or a desire to consume our livers. The UT is still, buffering on that particular emotional nuance. How plausible is such a device? Can we ever truly achieve a Babel fish? That helpful creature from the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy that you pop in your ear to understand any language in the universe. You look at the state of our current machine translation technology. It's come a phenomenally long way, particularly in the last decade or so, driven by advances in neural networks and deep learning. You can point your phone at a sign in a foreign language and get an instant, often quite accurate, translation. You can have near real-time voice translation for common language pairs, facilitating conversations that would have been impossible just a generation ago. This is incredibly useful for global tourism, international business, and even just understanding that catchy foreign pop song you can't get out of your head. A mainstream historical fact for you: the Rosetta Stone, discovered in 1799, was a crucial key to deciphering ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs. It contained the same decree inscribed in 3 scripts: hieroglyphic, demotic, and ancient Greek. Because Greek was understood, scholars like Jean-François Champollion were able to unlock the meaning of the hieroglyphs. In a way, the Rosetta Stone was an early, static form of universal translator, bridging a vast linguistic and historical divide. Modern machine translation often relies on similar principles, training on vast parallel corpora, large bodies of text that exist in multiple languages. But the jump from translating known human languages, which mostly share underlying cognitive structures and a common human experience of the world, to translating a completely unknown alien language from a species with a different evolutionary history, different sensory apparatus, and potentially a completely different way of conceptualizing reality, is colossal. Star Trek's UT often seems to work by analyzing brainwave patterns or matrices of thought, somehow bypassing the need for pre-existing linguistic data. This implies a telepathic or advanced neurological scanning component, which is a significant leap beyond just analyzing sound waves or syntax. Scientists still argue whether language is primarily a learned behavior or if there's an innate universal grammar, as proposed by linguists like Noam Chomsky, hardwired into the human brain. If such a universal grammar exists for humans, would it extend to alien species? Or would their languages be built on entirely different foundational principles, making them fundamentally untranslatable in a direct one-to-one sense? Imagine a species that communicates primarily through a complex interplay of bioluminescent color patterns and subtle pheromonal shifts, where grammar is expressed through the timing and intensity of light pulses, and emotional content is conveyed by some aromatic molecules. How would a UT even begin to map that onto spoken English or any other human language? It would be like trying to explain a symphony to someone who can only perceive the color blue. The UT in Star Trek is remarkably good, not just at literal translation, but also at conveying intent, nuance, and even idioms, though occasionally it slips up for comedic effect. The alien ambassador says his Grebe Glarb is feeling particularly plinty today. Captain, I believe that's a good thing. This implies an incredible level of cultural understanding built into the translation matrix. Language isn't just words. It's embedded in a vast web of cultural context, shared history, unspoken assumptions, and nonverbal cues. Think about sarcasm, irony, humor. These are often conveyed not by the words themselves, but by tone of voice, facial expression, body language. How does a disembodied UT, or even one integrated into a comm badge, pick up on all those subtleties from a species that might not even have a face in the human sense. A quirky tidbit for your linguistic amusement, there's a constructed language called Toki Pona, created by Sonia Lang, which aims for maximal meaning with minimal complexity. It has only about 120-125 root words in a very simple grammar. Proponents find it a fascinating experiment in semantic minimalism. Could an alien language be similarly minimalistic? Or perhaps mind-bogglingly complex in ways we can't even imagine? The UT would need to be prepared for all extremes. One wonders if the Federation has a dedicated department of extremely weird syntax, constantly updating the translator's algorithms. There's also the question of how the UT gets its initial data for a brand new language. In some episodes, it seems to learn incredibly quickly, almost instantly, after hearing just a few phrases. This suggests some highly advanced pattern recognition and hypothesis testing, perhaps even a form of AI that can deduce grammatical rules and vocabulary from very sparse input. It's a bit like those language learning apps that promise fluency after 10 easy lessons, but on a galactic warp speed scale. Congratulations, you have unlocked the basic grumbling module for Ferengi. Advanced haggling will be available after the next software update. That's our little UT app joke. Even if a perfect translation were possible, would we always want it? Sometimes the ambiguity and the challenge of understanding can lead to deeper insights or more cautious diplomacy. If every nuance is instantly laid bare, could it sometimes exacerbate conflict rather than resolve it? Imagine an alien ambassador whose polite phrasing, when perfectly translated, actually conveys a deep-seated contempt. Sometimes a little bit of lost in translation might be a diplomatic blessing in disguise. The practicalities of the UT are also interesting. It usually produces audio in the listener's own language, often even mimicking the speaker's vocal patterns. This means it's not just translating, it's also synthesizing a voice. And it has to do this for everyone on the bridge simultaneously, each hearing the alien in their native tongue, assuming a multilingual Federation crew. That's a lot of processing and personalized audio streaming. The dream of a universal translator is deeply tied to the Star Trek ethos of understanding and peaceful coexistence. It's a tool that breaks down barriers, enabling dialogue where there might otherwise be only confusion or fear. It facilitates the grand vision of a diverse galactic community. In our own world, the ongoing improvements in machine translation are already having a significant impact, fostering greater understanding between cultures and making information more accessible globally. While the jump to translating truly alien thought patterns remains firmly in the realm of science fiction for now, the human drive to connect and communicate across linguistic divides is very real. Perhaps the ultimate UT wouldn't just translate words, but would also provide a cultural context overlay, explaining relevant customs, beliefs, and potential faux pas before you accidentally offer a plate of replicated gaw to a visiting vegan ambassador from a pacifist plant-based civilization. Now that would be a useful piece of technology on any planet. You listen again to the imaginary artichoke squirrel, its complex clicks and whistles now rendered as a perfectly understandable request for spare cosmic string, and you appreciate the quiet miracle that the UT represents, a bridge of words across the silent gulfs of space. Having effortlessly conversed with our many tentacled, cosmic string-seeking alien friends, thanks to the marvel of the universal translator, your thoughts now drift back to the homeworld, to Earth, in the Star Trek future. Earth isn't just the birthplace of humanity, it's often depicted as a kind of paradise, a testament to ecological recovery and enlightened planetary management. Gone are the images of smog-choked cities, polluted oceans, and decimated rainforests that haunt our current era. Instead, you picture vast green spaces, crystal clear waters, and a global climate maintained in harmonious balance. It's implied that humanity, after presumably teetering on the brink of environmental self-destruction, perhaps around the same chaotic period as those eugenics wars or World War III we alluded to earlier, finally got its act together. They learned to live in concert with their planet, not just on it. You imagine standing on a balcony overlooking a futuristic San Francisco, home to Starfleet headquarters. The air is sweet, carrying the scent of the sea and blooming flora. There are no roaring ground vehicles belching fumes. Transport is silent, efficient, and emission-free. The sky is a vibrant blue, unmarred by industrial haze. It's a far cry from the environmental anxieties that plague our 21st century minds. This future Earth isn't just technologically advanced, it's healed. How did they do it? And more importantly, could we ever achieve such a profound turnaround? One of the key enabling factors, often hinted at, is advanced technology. Weather control networks, for instance, seem to be a standard feature on technologically mature Federation planets. Imagine being able to prevent catastrophic hurricanes, end devastating droughts, or ensure optimal growing conditions for agriculture across the globe, all managed by sophisticated atmospheric processing stations. No more worrying if your picnic will be rained out. The forecast is always pleasantly sunny with a light, cooling breeze, unless you specifically request dramatic thunderstorm for theatrical effect in your local holodeck program. Of course, the power and responsibility of controlling a planet's entire weather system would be immense. One poorly calibrated algorithm, one disgruntled intern at the global weather nexus, and you could accidentally flash freeze the Sahara or turn the Amazon into a dust bowl. Whoops! Sorry, Siberia. That blizzard was meant for Mars. My bad. That's our little climate control mishap joke. Then there's the matter of pollution and waste. With replicator technology, as we discussed, the need for mass manufacturing of consumer goods diminishes significantly. And the replicators themselves are part of a closed-loop system, breaking down waste into raw matter for reuse. This would drastically reduce landfill, industrial effluent, and the mountains of plastic choking our oceans. If you can replicate a new pair of boots perfectly, you don't need factories churning out millions of them with all the associated environmental costs. If your food is materialized on demand, you eliminate vast swaths of the agricultural industrial complex with its reliance on pesticides, fertilizers, and long-distance refrigerated transport. This vision of a circular economy, where waste is a resource, is something our current society is only just beginning to seriously explore. Large-scale ecosystem restoration also seems to have occurred, perhaps vast reforestation projects, powered by advanced botanical science and automated systems, help to reclaim deserts and sequester carbon. Maybe sophisticated bioremediation techniques, using genetically engineered microbes, were employed to clean up contaminated waterways and soil. You can picture teams of Federation ecologists and xenobotanists, because why stick to just Earth species when you've got a whole galaxy of plants to choose from working to restore biodiversity? Reintroduce extinct species carefully, one hopes, to avoid any Jurassic Park-style oopsies and create resilient, thriving ecosystems. A mainstream historical fact for you, the creation of the U.S. National Park System, and starting with Yellowstone in 1872, was a landmark act of conservation. It set aside vast tracts of land for preservation, recognizing their intrinsic value beyond immediate economic exploitation. This was a crucial step in the global conservation movement, an acknowledgement that some places are worth protecting for their own sake and for future generations. The Federation's Earth seems to have taken this principle and applied it planet-wide. But technology alone isn't the answer. The Federation's environmental success story also implies a profound shift in consciousness, in values. The pursuit of endless material growth, a driving force in many of our current economies, seems to have been replaced by a focus on sustainability, knowledge, and a deeper connection to the natural world, or what remains of it. If they've paved over paradise to put up a parking lot for shuttlecraft, which seems unlikely, this aligns with those Federation ideals we touched upon in the very beginning. A society that has moved beyond short-term thinking and embraced a longer, more holistic view of its place in the cosmos and its responsibilities to its home world. Scientists still argue whether a truly sustainable global civilization is possible without significant population control or a radical de-emphasis on individual consumption. Even with advanced technology, Star Trek rarely delves into the specifics of Earth's population numbers in its utopian future, but it's a critical variable. Even with replicators and perfect recycling, a planet has finite limits in terms of space, energy flux, and the capacity of its ecosystems to support life, even if that life is just enjoying the view. A quirky environmental tidbit in the 1970s. There was a brief fad for pet rocks. These were literally smooth stones, marketed with a humorous care and training manual. It was a clever satire on consumerism, but also, in its own strange way, a very low-impact product. If future environmentalism involves everyone just replicating their own pet rock and being perfectly content, we might be onto something. Though, knowing humans, we'd probably start demanding bespoke, geologically accurate replicated pet rocks from specific Martian craters. The level of global cooperation required to achieve and maintain such a planetary balance would be unprecedented. Think about our current struggles to implement international climate agreements. Now imagine coordinating global weather patterns, managing shared oceanic resources, and ensuring that all nations adhere to strict environmental protocols. It requires a level of trust, shared purpose, and effective global governance that seems almost as fantastical as warp drive. Perhaps this is another area where a history of conflict and near catastrophe served as the necessary crucible to forge that unity. When you've stared into the abyss of ecological collapse, maybe petty nationalisms start to look a lot less appealing. And what about off-world resources? The Federation has access to an entire galaxy. Does this reduce the pressure on Earth's own environment? Perhaps some resource-intensive or polluting industries, if any still exist, that can't be managed by replicators or clean energy are moved off-planet. This is a common trope in science fiction. The sacrifice zones move to asteroids or uninhabited moons. It solves the problem for Earth, but it raises questions about the ethics of exporting our environmental impact, even to seemingly lifeless worlds. The Prime Directive, one hopes, would extend to not casually trashing pristine alien ecosystems just because they don't have sentient inhabitants complaining about it yet. The vision of a restored, vibrant Earth in Star Trek serves as a powerful symbol of hope. It suggests that our current environmental crises are not insurmountable, that we can find a way to live sustainably and even repair some of the damage we've done. It requires technological innovation, yes, but more fundamentally, it demands a shift in our collective mindset, a recognition that the health of the planet is inextricably linked to our own well-being and future. It's a future where environmentalism isn't a niche concern, but a foundational principle of society. You take a deep, imaginary breath of that clean, future Earth air. It doesn't smell of exhaust fumes or industrial processes. It smells of growing things, of water, of life. Achieving that state will be an immense undertaking, perhaps the greatest challenge our species has ever faced. But the Star Trek future whispers that it's possible, that a greener, more harmonious world isn't just a dream, but a destination we can choose to work towards. With Earth imagined as a restored Eden, its environment managed with wisdom and advanced technology, your thoughts naturally turn to how its citizens, and indeed all citizens of the Federation, become such well-rounded, knowledgeable individuals. The answer, in large part, seems to lie in their approach to education, epitomized by institutions like Starfleet Academy. This isn't your dusty old alma mater with crowded lecture halls and textbooks costing more than a decent replicator. If you had one, Starfleet Academy, and by extension the broader Federation educational philosophy, appears to be a dynamic, immersive, and lifelong pursuit of knowledge and personal growth. You can almost smell the old space parchment and hear the gentle hum of 1,000 PADD's personal access display devices, displaying everything from advanced stellar cartography to the subtleties of Vulcan poetry. Imagine being a cadet at Starfleet Academy. Your curriculum would likely be a mind-boggling blend of astrophysics, xenolinguistics, Federation law, warp mechanics, diplomacy, survival training, because you never know when you'll be stranded on a hostile planet with only your wits and a standard issue emergency blanket. and perhaps even a mandatory course in dealing with Q's existential shenanigans. The emphasis isn't just on rote memorization of facts, after all. You have instant access to vast databases through the ship's computer or your personal PADD. Instead, the focus seems to be on critical thinking, problem solving, ethical reasoning, and the ability to apply knowledge in complex, often unprecedented, situations. It's about training not just skilled technicians, but wise decision makers and adaptable explorers. Technology would undoubtedly play a massive role. Remember those holodecks we explored? Imagine using them for educational simulations. You could experience the command of a starship during a crisis. Practice intricate surgical procedures on holographic patients who, one hopes, are programmed to be very forgiving of rookie mistakes. Or conduct diplomatic negotiations with highly realistic alien ambassadors who might throw all sorts of cultural curveballs at you. Cadet, your attempt to offer the Gromulan ambassador a replicated ham sandwich was unfortunate. They are, as you should recall from your xenocultural studies, a species of sentient fungi who find cured meats deeply insulting. You've set back diplomatic relations by at least a standard year. It beats a pop quiz any day. Personalized learning paths would likely be the norm. AI tutors, perhaps descendants of the ship's computer intelligence, or even specialized pedagogical AIs, could adapt the curriculum to your individual learning style, pace, and interests. If you excel at theoretical warp field dynamics but struggle with the practical application of aligning dilithium crystals, your AI tutor could provide targeted exercises and simulations until you can recalibrate a warp matrix in your sleep. This kind of individualized attention, available to everyone, would be a far cry from the often one-size-fits-all approach of many traditional education systems. Access to information in the Federation appears to be virtually limitless and instantaneous. The sum total of galactic knowledge, constantly updated and cross-referenced, would be at your fingertips. This is a truly profound concept. A mainstream historical fact for you: the Library of Alexandria, in ancient Egypt, was one of the largest and most significant libraries of the ancient world. Aiming to collect all known scholarship, its destruction, or rather its gradual decline and loss of scrolls, is seen as a tragic loss of knowledge. In the Federation, it's as if every citizen carries a Library of Alexandria in their pocket, and it's fireproof, waterproof, and probably has a really good search function. But what about the nature of knowledge itself in such a future, with information so readily available? The emphasis shifts from what you know to how you think and what you can do with that knowledge. The ability to sift through vast amounts of data, identify patterns, discern truth from misinformation. Because even in the 24th century, one imagines there might be the equivalent of galactic clickbait or conspiracy theories about tribbles secretly running the Federation economy, and synthesize information from diverse fields becomes paramount. Interdisciplinary studies would likely be the core of higher education rather than a niche pursuit. After all, solving complex problems, whether it's a stellar phenomenon threatening a colony or a diplomatic crisis with a newly encountered species, rarely falls neatly into one academic discipline. Scientists still argue about the best pedagogical approaches to foster creativity and critical thinking. Is it through structured problem solving, open-ended exploration, collaborative projects, or some combination thereof? The Federation model seems to embrace all of these. Cadets are often shown working in teams, facing complex ethical dilemmas, and being encouraged to think outside the box. The infamous Kobayashi Maru test, a no-win scenario designed to assess a cadet's character and response to a hopeless situation, is a prime example. It's not about finding the right answer, but about how you approach the problem and cope with inevitable failure. Unless you're James T. Kirk, of course, who famously reprogrammed the simulation because he didn't believe in no-win scenarios, a move that was either brilliant initiative or grounds for immediate expulsion, depending on which Starfleet admiral you ask. Yes, Mr. Kirk, very clever. Now, about that academic integrity hearing. That's our little Kirk joke. Lifelong learning seems to be an ingrained part of Federation culture. You don't just graduate from Starfleet Academy and then rest on your laurels. Officers and civilians alike are constantly updating their skills, learning new things, and pursuing personal development. This makes sense in a rapidly advancing technological society where new discoveries are constantly being made and the galactic landscape is always changing. It's a culture that values curiosity and intellectual growth at every stage of life. You can picture elderly admirals taking up xenobotany or retired engineers finally getting around to mastering the Vulcan lute. A quirky educational tidbit for you in medieval universities. Students would often engage in highly structured public disputations, formal debates where they would argue for or against a particular thesis using logic and rhetoric. It was a rigorous form of intellectual training. Perhaps in Starfleet Academy, these disputations are replaced by holodeck simulations where cadets have to argue the merits of the Prime Directive with a holographic Socrates who has an uncanny understanding of warp field mechanics. The accessibility of this advanced education is also key. The Federation ideal suggests that such high-quality learning opportunities are available to all citizens, regardless of their background or planet of origin. This would require massive investment in educational infrastructure and resources. But given the post-scarcity economy facilitated by replicators and advanced energy, it's conceivable. Imagine a universe where your potential isn't limited by your ability to pay tuition fees or your geographical location. Everyone has the chance to become the best version of themselves, to contribute their unique talents to the collective good. Of course, even in this educational utopia, there would be challenges. How do you ensure that access to information doesn't lead to information overload or a shallow understanding of complex topics? How do you cultivate wisdom and ethical judgment? Not just technical proficiency. How do you encourage original thought when so much knowledge is already codified and instantly available? These are challenges we are already beginning to grapple with in our own information age. And they would likely persist, albeit in different forms, in a Star Trek future. The Starfleet model of education, with its blend of rigorous training, ethical grounding, technological integration, and commitment to lifelong learning, is an inspiring vision. It suggests a future where humanity has embraced the idea that our greatest adventure is not just the exploration of outer space, but the endless exploration of inner space, the boundless potential of the informed and curious mind. You close your eyes and imagine the quiet hum of a Federation library, filled not just with data, but with the eager pursuit of understanding, a testament to a civilization that truly values the power of knowledge. So, we've envisioned this Star Trek future a united Earth, a post-scarcity economy thanks to replicators, warp drive zipping us across the galaxy, fascinating alien contact, near-perfect medicine, sentient AI companions, immersive holodecks for education and entertainment, universal translators bridging communication gaps, a healed global environment, and an enlightened system of lifelong learning. It all sounds, well, pretty idyllic, doesn't it? You might be forgiven for thinking that humans in this era would be serene, unflappable paragons of virtue, having transcended all the petty squabbles and failings of their ancestors. And yet, when you actually watch Star Trek, what do you see? You see characters who are still undeniably, gloriously, and sometimes frustratingly human. They have egos. They make mistakes. They fall in love, experience jealousy, grapple with fear, ambition, and doubt. They argue, they hold grudges, they occasionally bend the rules looking at you again. James T., Kirk, and sometimes they make colossal errors in judgment. This, you realize, is actually one of the most subtly brilliant aspects of Star Trek's enduring appeal. Despite the utopian setting and the incredible technological advancements, the stories are almost always about the human element, or at least the sentient being element, grappling with challenges that are often internal as much as external. The Federation may have solved poverty and disease, but it hasn't eradicated human nature, and perhaps that's a good thing. Would a future populated by perfectly rational, emotionless beings be a future worth striving for? Commander Data's entire arc is a testament to the idea that true humanity, or personhood, involves embracing that messy, complicated, emotional spectrum. Consider the conflicts that still arise within Starfleet, an organization ostensibly dedicated to peaceful exploration and upholding the highest ideals of the Federation. You see ambitious admirals making ethically questionable decisions for what they believe is the greater good, like Admiral Layton's attempted military coup in Deep Space Nine. You see personality clashes between crew members, struggles for command, and moments of profound personal crisis. Captain Picard, a man of immense integrity and intellect, still battles the trauma of his assimilation by the Borg. Lieutenant Commander Worf constantly struggles to reconcile his Klingon heritage with his Starfleet duties. These internal and interpersonal conflicts drive much of the drama. If everyone was perfectly well-adjusted and agreed all the time, it would make for very dull television. Captain, all systems nominal. No existential threats detected. Shall we play some poker? This persistence of human fallibility makes you wonder, is human nature itself the biggest obstacle to achieving and maintaining a Star Trek-like utopia? We can invent all the wondrous technology we want, but if we can't manage our own inherent biases, our tribal instincts, our capacity for greed or aggression, will we always be at risk of undermining our own progress? The Federation's backstory, with its hints of devastating past conflicts like the eugenics wars in World War III, suggests that humanity had to go through a very fiery crucible, a period where its worst tendencies nearly led to its annihilation, before it could collectively choose a better path. It's a sobering thought that progress might not be a gentle incline, but a series of near catastrophes that force us to learn and adapt, often the hard way. Scientists still argue whether human nature is fundamentally fixed or if it can evolve significantly through cultural and societal changes. Are we biologically programmed for certain behaviors that will always be in tension with utopian ideals? Or can education, enlightenment, and perhaps even subtle forms of future bioenhancement, a controversial topic Star Trek itself touches upon, with figures like Khan Noonien Singh, genuinely reshape our core motivations and responses? The Federation seems to operate on the optimistic assumption that cultural evolution is possible, that through reason, empathy, and a commitment to shared principles, humans and other species can learn to manage their more destructive impulses. A mainstream historical fact for you: the Enlightenment of the 17th and 18th centuries was a period of profound intellectual and philosophical change in Europe, emphasizing reason, individualism, and skepticism towards traditional authority. Thinkers like John Locke, Voltaire, and Jean-Jacques Rousseau championed ideals like liberty, progress, tolerance, and constitutional government. This was a significant attempt to reshape society based on rational principles, a cultural software update for humanity. While it didn't create a perfect utopia, the French Revolution got a bit messy. For instance, its ideals profoundly shaped the modern world and continue to inspire movements for social and political reform. Star Trek's Federation often feels like the ultimate fulfillment of Enlightenment ideals on a galactic scale. But even in the Federation, ambition still exists. People still want to be starship captains, distinguished scientists, respected diplomats. This isn't necessarily a bad thing. Ambition can be a powerful motivator for excellence and achievement. The challenge is to channel that ambition towards constructive ends within an ethical framework, rather than letting it devolve into ruthless competition or the pursuit of power for its own sake. Starfleet's command structure, its emphasis on duty and service, seems designed to manage this, but you still see characters like the young, ambitious ensign Sito Jaxa in Lower Decks, the TNG episode, not the animated series, though that also has its share of ambitious ensigns, whose desire to prove herself leads her into a dangerous situation. Her story is a poignant reminder that even with the best intentions, personal drives can have complex consequences. Yes, her ambition was admirable, a stoic Captain Picard might reflect, but perhaps a little less ambition and a little more caution around Cardassian space would have been prudent. That's our little career advice joke for aspiring Starfleet officers. And what about those character flaws that make our heroes so relatable? Dr. McCoy's irascibility, Spock's initial struggle with human emotion, Commander Riker's occasional overconfidence, Lieutenant Torres's fiery temper. These aren't bugs in the system, they're features. They provide opportunities for growth, for learning, for comedy, and for demonstrating that strength isn't about being perfect, but about acknowledging imperfections and striving to overcome them, or at least work with them. A ship full of perfectly serene, always logical Vulcans, pre-emotional awakening, of course, might be incredibly efficient, but it wouldn't be a very human adventure. A quirky tidbit regarding human nature. The Dunning-Kruger effect is a cognitive bias whereby people with low ability at a task overestimate their ability. It's essentially when you're too unskilled to even realize how unskilled you are. One can only imagine this playing out in Starfleet training simulations. Cadet, your piloting during the asteroid field simulation was creatively chaotic. You seem to have invented several new and highly inadvisable evasive maneuvers, while also mistaking a large potato for a strategically important nebula. One hopes Starfleet has good remedial programs for Dunning-Kruger cases. The Star Trek universe seems to suggest that while we may not be able to entirely eliminate our flaws or the darker aspects of our nature, we can create societal structures and cultural norms that encourage our better angels. The emphasis on exploration over conquest, on understanding over exploitation, on cooperation over conflict, these are all choices that the Federation has made, presumably after learning hard lessons from a more turbulent past. It's not that future humans are inherently better than us, but perhaps they live in a society that makes it easier to be better. A society that rewards empathy, curiosity, and integrity. This ongoing presence of human and alien imperfection is what keeps the Star Trek universe dynamic. It allows for stories about redemption, about overcoming prejudice, both personal and societal, about the struggle to live up to one's ideals even when it's difficult. If the Federation were truly perfect, there would be no need for Starfleet to boldly go. Everything would already be known, solved, and perfectly managed. The frontier isn't just spatial, it's also ethical and personal. So, as you contemplate this complex tapestry, you realize that the Star Trek future isn't about achieving a static state of perfection. It's about an ongoing process of striving, of learning, of growing, both as individuals and as a civilization. The technology is impressive. The societal ideals are inspiring, but it's the enduring, imperfect, yet ever-hopeful human and alien spirit that truly powers the Enterprise. And perhaps that's the most realistic and ultimately the most encouraging message of all. We've explored the grand societal structures, the incredible technologies like replicators and warp drive, the utopian ideals, and even the persistent quirks of human nature in this potential Star Trek future. But underlying all of this, from the hum of the Enterprise's engines to the glow of a city on a healed Earth, is one fundamental requirement: energy. Vast, unimaginable quantities of clean, reliable, and controllable energy. Without it, the replicators fall silent, the warp cores cool, the holodecks fade to black, and the Federation's bright vision starts to look decidedly dim. So your thoughts now turn to the engine room, to the power core, and you wonder what exactly is fueling this paradise. Star Trek offers a two-pronged answer, blending the fantastical with the scientifically plausible. The fantastical element, of course, is dilithium, those famous crystalline structures that are apparently essential for regulating the matter-antimatter reactions that power Starfleet's warp drives. Dilithium crystals are often depicted as rare, strategically vital, and sometimes prone to recrystallization issues at the most inconvenient moments. Usually when a Romulan warbird is decloaking off the port bow. "Captain, the dilithium matrix is fluctuating," Scotty or Geordi would exclaim, sweat beading on their brow. "We're losing warp power." The exact physics of how dilithium works is delightfully vague, a classic piece of Trek technobabble involving phrases like controlling the annihilation reaction and focusing the plasma stream. It's a plot device. Really, a MacGuffin that allows for energy crises and dramatic tension. As far as current science is concerned, There's no known element or crystal with the properties ascribed to dilithium. It remains firmly in the realm of science fiction invention. But then there's the more scientifically grounded part of the equation, fusion power. Starships are often said to use fusion reactors for their impulse engines for sublight travel and to power their internal systems. And on planets, fusion is implied to be the clean energy backbone of Federation society, providing the juice for those sprawling, ecologically balanced cities and advanced infrastructure. This is where science fiction begins to align with real-world scientific aspiration. Fusion is the process that powers our sun and all other stars. It involves forcing light atomic nuclei, typically isotopes of hydrogen like deuterium and tritium, to fuse together under extreme temperature and pressure, forming a heavier nucleus like helium and releasing a tremendous amount of energy in the process. The fuel deuterium can be extracted from seawater, and tritium can be bred from lithium is relatively abundant. And the process produces no greenhouse gases and far less long-lived radioactive waste compared to nuclear fission, which is what powers our current nuclear power plants. A mainstream historical fact for you, the first successful demonstration of controlled nuclear fusion on a small scale occurred in the 1980s, with Soviet scientists leading early breakthroughs with devices called tokamaks, donut-shaped magnetic confinement chambers. Since then, international efforts have been slowly but steadily working towards achieving sustained, controlled fusion reactions that produce more energy than they consume, the elusive goal of ignition or net energy gain. We are, after decades of research and billions of dollars invested in massive experimental reactors like ITER, International Thermonuclear Experimental Reactor in France, getting tantalizingly close. In late 2022, scientists at the National Ignition Facility in the US achieved a significant milestone, producing more energy from a fusion reaction than was directly put into the fuel to ignite it, though not yet more than the total energy to run the whole facility. It's a huge step, but commercial fusion power plants are still likely decades away. The challenges are immense. To get hydrogen nuclei to fuse, you need to overcome their mutual electrical repulsion. This requires heating them to temperatures of hundreds of millions of degrees Celsius, hotter than in the core of the sun, creating a state of matter called plasma. Containing this superheated plasma is a monumental engineering feat. Most approaches involve powerful magnetic fields in tokamaks and stellarators, or incredibly powerful lasers in inertial confinement fusion, like at NIF. Maintaining stability, controlling the reactions, and extracting the energy efficiently are all incredibly complex problems. Scientists still argue about the most promising path to practical fusion power, with various designs and approaches competing for funding and breakthroughs. If we could crack controlled fusion, it would be a true game changer for human civilization. It would offer a nearly limitless, clean, and safe energy source, capable of powering our world for millennia. It could desalinate oceans, recycle waste on a massive scale, perhaps even making those Star Trek replicators slightly more energy feasible, though still a huge leap, and fuel future space exploration efforts. Even if it's just for really powerful ion drives rather than warp cores, the quest for fusion power is, in many ways, a quest for a Star Trek-level energy future. Imagine a world powered by fusion. No more geopolitical conflicts over fossil fuel reserves. A dramatic reduction in air pollution and carbon emissions, helping to heal our planet as we envisioned earlier. Energy abundance could lift nations out of poverty and provide the foundation for a truly sustainable global society. It's a beautiful dream, and one that thousands of scientists and engineers around the world are working diligently to make a reality. You can almost hear the quiet, powerful hum of a future fusion plant, a miniature sun safely contained and tirelessly providing for humanity's needs. Reactor efficiency at 102%. Chief, a calm voice reports. Another beautiful day in paradise, powered by stellar fire. That's our little fusion plant operator joke. A quirky energy tidbit for you, some early, rather optimistic. Proponents of nuclear fission in the mid-20th century predicted that electricity would become too cheap to meter. While that particular dream didn't quite pan out due to the complexities and costs of fission power, The promise of truly abundant and inexpensive energy is a recurring theme in visions of advanced futures. Fusion holds out that hope once more. But even with fusion, the energy demands of a full-blown Star Trek society, especially one with commonplace warp travel and matter replication, are still staggering. Warp drive, as we touched upon, would likely require energy densities far beyond even what fusion could provide, necessitating something like those matter-antimatter reactions that dilithium supposedly regulates. Matter-antimatter annihilation is the most efficient energy source theoretically possible, converting 100% of the mass involved into energy according to E equals mc squared. However, producing and storing significant quantities of antimatter is incredibly difficult and dangerous. We can create tiny amounts in particle accelerators, but it's astronomically expensive and highly unstable. A breach in your antimatter containment pods, as any Starfleet engineer will tell you with a grimace, is a very, very bad day, usually resulting in a large ship-shaped crater. So, the Federation's energy portfolio likely involves a hierarchy fusion for planetary and impulse power, and then the more exotic matter-antimatter systems, carefully mediated by those indispensable dilithium crystals, for the extreme demands of warp travel and perhaps some high-end replicator functions. It's a multi-layered solution for a civilization with an insatiable, but hopefully responsible, appetite for energy. The pursuit of these advanced energy sources is not just a technical challenge, it's an ethical one too. How do we ensure equitable access? How do we manage the risks associated with such powerful technologies? How do we prevent their misuse? These are questions that a future Federation would have had to answer. Their success in creating a stable, utopian society suggests they found good answers, likely rooted in those core ideals of cooperation, shared benefit, and responsible stewardship. As you ponder the glowing warp core of your imaginary starship, you feel a sense of awe at the sheer power it represents, both the fictional power of dilithium-controlled antimatter and the real-world promise of fusion. Our journey to a Star Trek future is, in many ways, a journey for energy, the clean, abundant, and transformative power that could unlock so many other possibilities. Without it, we remain tethered, limited. With it, the stars themselves might just be within reach. Having secured our imaginary starship's power supply with dilithium-regulated matter-antimatter reactions and robust fusion backups, your thoughts now turn to the less serene aspects of space travel in the Star Trek universe. While the Federation espouses peace and exploration, the galaxy, as any seasoned Starfleet captain knows, can be a surprisingly hostile place. From grumpy Klingons having a bad hair or forehead ridge, to insidious Borg cubes with a penchant for aggressive assimilation. Threats abound. This necessitates another suite of iconic Star Trek technologies, defensive shields and phasers. That familiar cry from the tactical officer. Shields up, red alert, signals a shift from peaceful exploration to a tense standoff or a full-blown firefight, with beams of energy lancing through the vacuum of space. You can almost feel the subtle thrum as the ship's deflector and shields energize, forming an invisible bubble of protective energy around the vessel. These shields are capable of absorbing or deflecting incoming weapons fire, disruptor beams, plasma torpedoes, and other unpleasantries, at least for a while. Shields holding at 80%, Captain, comes the report, usually followed by a whirring tremor as another volley impacts. Now 60%. The physics behind these shields is like much of Starfleet's advanced tech, a bit hand-wavy. It often involves projecting a graviton field or a subspace distortion, creating a barrier that incoming energy or projectiles can't easily penetrate. The energy requirements for maintaining effective shields against sustained attack would be enormous, drawing heavily on those powerful warp cores we just discussed. If your main power goes offline, your shields are usually next, and that's when things get dicey. Are such energy shields plausible? We don't have anything quite like them currently, but the concept isn't entirely without scientific basis. Scientists still argue whether powerful enough magnetic fields or plasma windows could deflect charged particles, or even some forms of radiation. Research into plasma shields has been explored, Theoretically, for protecting spacecraft from radiation during long voyages or for deflecting small space debris. These would involve creating a dense cloud of magnetized plasma around a craft. However, scaling this up to withstand the kind of firepower seen in Star Trek battles, energy weapons that can vaporize asteroids, is a whole different order of magnitude. It would require field strengths and energy outputs far beyond our current capabilities. And it's unclear how effective they would be against uncharged kinetic weapons or certain types of exotic Trek weaponry. Then there are the phasers, phased energy rectification, Starfleet's standard directed energy weapon. These are wonderfully versatile tools, capable of being set to stun to peacefully incapacitate an opponent with a gentle energy nudge that somehow never causes permanent neurological damage. Unless the plot requires it, or to kill by disrupting biological matter or vaporizing inanimate objects. They can be handheld pistols or massive ship-mounted arrays capable of carving chunks out of enemy vessels. Phasers are often described as firing a nadion beam, nadions being yet another convenient, fictional particle that allows for adjustable effects. The ability to switch from non-lethal to lethal force with a simple setting change is a key feature, reflecting the Federation's preference for peaceful solutions, but its preparedness for necessary conflict. Our real-world equivalents are still catching up. We have lasers, of course. A mainstream historical fact for you, the first working laser was built in 1960 by Theodore Maiman. Since then, lasers have found countless applications, from barcode scanners and Blu-ray players to industrial cutting and medical surgery. High-energy laser weapon systems are now being developed and deployed by various militaries, capable of shooting down drones or missiles, or even disabling small boats. These are powerful, certainly, but they don't quite have the variable effects or the same kind of destructive oomph per shot as a Starfleet phaser on a high setting. Current laser weapons also face challenges with atmospheric distortion, power requirements, and cooling. Firing a phaser that can slice through a starship's hull implies an incredibly concentrated and potent energy beam. Other directed energy weapon concepts include particle beams, which accelerate streams of subatomic particles to near light speed, and plasma weapons, which would fire bolts of superheated, ionized gas. Research into these areas is ongoing, but they all face significant hurdles in terms of power, range, and stability. The idea of a handheld weapon that can reliably stun a 6-foot Klingon without accidentally giving him a mild sunburn instead, or cleanly vaporize a bulkhead without a massive recoil or an equally massive battery pack, is still very much in the realm of science fiction. You can just imagine the early prototypes. Ensign, careful with that experimental phaser. Setting 1 gives a pleasant warming sensation. Setting 2 makes excellent toast. But setting 3, well, we haven't quite worked out the kinks in setting 3. Don't point it at anything you value. That's our little phaser development joke. And let's not forget photon torpedoes, Starfleet's primary heavy ordnance. These are usually depicted as casings containing a payload of matter and antimatter, which annihilate upon detonation, releasing a tremendous blast. Given what we discussed about the power of matter-antimatter reactions, these would indeed be devastating weapons. The challenge, again, would be safely storing and launching such volatile payloads. A misfire in the torpedo bay would be spectacularly messy. Chief, are you sure those antimatter warheads are properly contained? They're making a funny fizzing sound, and Ensign Skippy just asked if it's normal for them to glow ominously. The ethical implications of developing and deploying such advanced weaponry are, of course, profound. Star Trek often grapples with these issues, with Starfleet officers frequently questioning orders or facing moral dilemmas related to the use of force. The Prime Directive, in its ideal form, seeks to avoid imposing Federation will, but the presence of powerful defensive and offensive capabilities means that the potential for imposition always exists. The hope is that a society advanced enough to create such technologies is also wise enough to use them responsibly, prioritizing de-escalation and peaceful resolution whenever possible. The very existence of settings like stun on phasers speaks to this ethical consideration, an attempt to provide options other than lethal force. A quirky tidbit during World War II, there were some rather outlandish proposals for superweapons, including a plan by the British to create an aircraft carrier out of picrete, a mixture of ice and wood pulp. The idea was that it would be unsinkable and could be repaired with seawater. While it never became a practical weapon of war, it shows the lengths to which human ingenuity and sometimes desperation can go when it comes to defense and offense. One wonders what bizarre, failed weapon prototypes litter the R&D labs of Starfleet's past. Perhaps a device that tried to defeat the Borg by loudly playing really terrible pop music from the late 20th century. It was deemed a war crime by the B-sharps of Beta Z. The development of defensive technologies often drives the development of offensive ones, and vice versa, leading to an arms race. We see this in Star Trek with various species constantly trying to find ways to penetrate each other's shields or develop more powerful weapons. The Federation, despite its peaceful ideals, is clearly a major military power in its quadrant, capable of defending itself and its interests. This is a pragmatic acknowledgement that utopia doesn't exist in a vacuum. It must be protected. The dream of perfect, impenetrable shields and precise, non-lethal weapons is an attractive one. It offers security without demanding excessive aggression. But the reality of conflict, even in the 24th century, seems to be that technology is a tool, and its impact depends entirely on the intentions and wisdom of those who wield it. As you imagine the hum of the shields and the ready glow of the phaser banks, you hope that in such a future, the lessons of restraint and the pursuit of peace are as deeply ingrained as the schematics for these powerful systems. As the imagined hum of energy shields fades and the phaser banks cool, you lean back in your captain's chair, feeling the gentle thrum of the starship around you. A vessel designed not just for defense, but primarily for a much grander purpose. Beyond all the gleaming technology, the utopian societal structures, and the challenges of navigating a complex galaxy, lies the philosophical heart of Star Trek. The very essence of what drives the Federation and its Starfleet, a profound commitment to exploration for its own sake, an insatiable curiosity about the universe, and a deeply humanist, or perhaps sentientist, to be more inclusive outlook. This isn't just about charting new star systems or cataloging gaseous anomalies. It's about a fundamental belief in the value of knowledge, understanding, and the potential for growth in all sentient beings. To boldly go where no one has gone before. That iconic split infinitive isn't just a catchy tagline, it's a mission statement, a declaration of intent that prioritizes discovery over conquest, learning over exploitation. You think about the sheer audacity of it, building these incredible vessels, veritable cities in space, and sending them out into the vast unknown, often with no guarantee of return, simply to see what's out there. It speaks to a deep-seated human and Vulcan, an Andorian, and Tellarite desire to push boundaries, to unravel mysteries, and to understand our place in the grand cosmic scheme, in a universe where replicators can provide for every material need and holodecks can simulate any imaginable experience. The one thing that remains truly scarce and infinitely valuable is new knowledge, new perspectives, new understanding. This philosophy is deeply intertwined with the principles of scientific inquiry. Starfleet ships are, in essence, mobile research laboratories. Science officers are key personnel, constantly scanning, analyzing, and theorizing. Anomalies aren't just dangers to be avoided, they're puzzles to be solved. New life forms aren't just potential threats, they're opportunities for study and, if possible, communication. There's a reverence for evidence, for logic, for the methodical process of observation and hypothesis testing. Even when faced with phenomena that seem to defy known physics, which happens with alarming regularity, prompting many a "that's impossible" captain from the science station, the first instinct is to understand, not to fear or destroy. This scientific worldview is a cornerstone of the Federation's enlightened approach. The humanism of Star Trek is also central. There's a fundamental respect for life in all its diverse forms, an assumption of inherent worth in sentient beings. This is most clearly expressed in the Prime Directive, which, for all its complexities and occasional agonizing moral dilemmas, is rooted in a profound respect for the autonomy and natural development of other cultures. It's an acknowledgement that our way anime isn't the only way, and that interference, even with the best intentions, can be deeply harmful. This humanist outlook extends to how individuals are treated within the Federation itself. The emphasis on rights, on personal growth as we saw with their education system, on the potential for redemption and understanding even for adversaries. It's a philosophy that strives to see the best in people, to appeal to their better angels, as we discussed when pondering human nature. But can these lofty ideals, exploration for its own sake, unwavering scientific curiosity, and universal humanism realistically become the dominant driving forces for an entire global, or even galactic, civilization? You look at our own world. While these values certainly exist and motivate many individuals and institutions, they often seem to be overshadowed by more pragmatic, or sometimes more base, motivations: economic gain, political power, national security, ideological conflict. Exploration is often funded with an eye towards resource exploitation or strategic advantage. Scientific research can be driven by commercial interests or military applications. Humanist ideals frequently clash with tribal loyalties and deep-seated prejudices. A mainstream historical fact for you: the Age of Discovery, from the 15th to the 17th century, saw European explorers like Columbus, Magellan, and Vasco da Gama undertake voyages that dramatically expanded the known world. While curiosity and a thirst for knowledge were undoubtedly factors, these expeditions were also heavily driven by the pursuit of trade routes, wealth, gold, spices, and colonial expansion. The impact on indigenous populations was often catastrophic. It serves as a stark reminder that exploration can have a very dark side if it's not guided by strong ethical principles. Starfleet's Prime Directive is, in many ways, a direct response to the lessons learned from such historical periods of colonial exploitation. Scientists still argue about the fundamental drivers of human behavior. Are we primarily motivated by self-interest and a desire for resources and status, as some evolutionary psychology theories might suggest? Or do we also possess an innate capacity for altruism, cooperation, and a genuine desire for knowledge and understanding that can, under the right conditions, become dominant? The Star Trek universe seems to bank on the latter, suggesting that once basic needs are met, replicators and fusion power and existential security is established. These higher motivations can come to the fore. It's an optimistic view of human potential, a belief that we can transcend our more primitive drives. Consider the sheer resources required for Starfleet's mission: building and maintaining a fleet of advanced starships, training a vast corps of highly skilled personnel, and funding decades-long missions into deep space represents an enormous societal investment. In our current world, such an undertaking would require a compelling justification in terms of tangible returns, economic benefits, national prestige, or defense applications. The idea of doing it primarily for the sheer joy of discovery and the pursuit of knowledge feels, well, like a luxury we can't quite afford on a grand scale, or at least a priority that often gets pushed down the list. Yes, mapping the Gorn Nebula is fascinating, Admiral, but have you seen our quarterly deficit? Perhaps we could sell advertising space on the hull of the Enterprise. Brought to you by Ferengi Commerce Authority for all your profitable acquisitions. That's our little Starfleet funding joke. Yet, there are glimpses of these ideals in our own history and present. The great scientific endeavors, like the Apollo program, which, yes, had Cold War motivations, but also undeniably captured a global sense of wonder and achievement. The Hubble Space Telescope, the Large Hadron Collider. These are driven by a profound desire to understand the universe and our place in it. The work of countless scientists, researchers, artists, and philosophers who dedicate their lives to expanding human knowledge and understanding, often with little expectation of material wealth, speaks to this intrinsic curiosity. International collaborations on scientific projects, humanitarian aid efforts, and cultural exchange programs demonstrate our capacity for cooperation and a sense of shared humanity. A quirky philosophical tidbit: Diogenes the Cynic, an ancient Greek philosopher, famously lived in a barrel and rejected societal conventions, seeking a life of virtue and simplicity. When Alexander the Great, the most powerful man in the world at the time, came to visit him and asked if there was anything he could do for him, Diogenes reportedly replied, "Yes, stand out of my sunlight." It's an extreme example of prioritizing intellectual and spiritual freedom over material wealth and power. Perhaps future Federation citizens, having all their material needs met, develop a touch of Diogenes' detachment from worldly possessions, freeing them to pursue knowledge and self-improvement, though hopefully with slightly better personal hygiene and less barrel dwelling. For the Star Trek philosophy to truly take hold, it would likely require that societal great awakening we've alluded to, a fundamental shift in global consciousness where the pursuit of wisdom, empathy, and understanding becomes as valued, if not more so, than the accumulation of wealth or power. It would mean educating future generations not just in science and technology, but in ethics, critical thinking, and cross-cultural understanding. It would mean creating a global culture that celebrates discovery, cherishes diversity, and prioritizes long-term well-being over short-term gains. It's a tall order, no doubt. Our history is filled with as many examples of conflict and short-sightedness as it is with enlightenment and progress. But the enduring appeal of Star Trek lies in its optimistic assertion that such a future is not only possible but worth striving for. It offers a vision where humanity and its diverse alien friends has chosen its better angels, where the endless frontier of knowledge is the ultimate lure, and where the prime directive is not just a rule, but a reflection of a deeply held respect for the intricate, wondrous tapestry of life in the universe. You look out at the star-dusted void on your imaginary view screen, and for a moment, that audacious hope feels almost within reach. And so here we are, nearing the end of our long, speculative drift through the myriad possibilities of a Star Trek future. We've peered at the gleaming hull of advanced technology, pondered the complexities of a united post-scarcity society, wrestled with the ethics of alien contact and artificial intelligence, and marveled at the boundless human and alien spirit for exploration and understanding. The view screen of your imagination has shown us wonders, warp drive bending space-time, replicators conjuring sustenance from energy, holodecks weaving dreams into tangible reality, and a verdant Earth, healed and harmonious. It's been quite the journey, hasn't it now? As the stars outside your imaginary viewport begin to take on a softer, more distant glow, the question settles in your mind: is this Star Trek universe a literal roadmap, a precise blueprint we should strive to follow step by step? Or is it something else, a guiding star, perhaps a powerful aspirational metaphor for what humanity, at its best, could become? You consider all the elements we've dissected: the perfectly functioning universal translator, the ever-reliable, mostly warp core, the almost magical medical tricorder. While we've seen glimmers of potential in our current science and technology for some of these marvels, many, like dilithium crystals or instantly effective energy shields against planet-shattering disruptors, remain firmly in the realm of hopeful fiction. If we fixate on achieving every specific gadget exactly as depicted, we might find ourselves waiting a very, very long time, possibly until the heat death of the universe, or until someone finally figures out how to make a truly satisfying replicated cup of Earl Grey that doesn't faintly taste of last week's goulash, a problem we humorously posited earlier. Perhaps, then, Star Trek's truest value isn't as a prophetic vision of specific future technologies, but as a philosophical touchstone. It presents a direction, a set of ideals towards which we might navigate. The core principles, the pursuit of knowledge, the celebration of diversity, the commitment to peace even when prepared for defense, the respect for all life, the belief in progress in the betterment of society. These are powerful currents that can guide us even if our future starships don't look exactly like the Enterprise, and our doctors still occasionally have to resort to saying, let's run some more tests, instead of just waving a glowing stick. Think about the societal evolution it portrays, a world without hunger or poverty, where education is a lifelong pursuit accessible to all, where environmental stewardship is a given. These are not just science fiction dreams, they are aspirations that resonate deeply with our current global challenges. The Federation, for all its occasional internal politics or external threats, represents a society that has managed to overcome many of the divisions and destructive tendencies that plague us now. It chose cooperation over conflict, understanding over prejudice, and long-term vision over short-sighted gain. How they got there, through what trials and awakenings, is often left to brief historical mentions, but the destination depicted is one of profound hope. A mainstream historical fact to ponder utopian literature has a long history, from Plato's Republic to Thomas More's Utopia, which literally means no place or good place, depending on the Greek root you emphasize. These works often serve not as practical guides to building a perfect society, but as critiques of existing societal flaws and as thought experiments about how things could be different. Star Trek, in many ways, continues this tradition, using the future as a mirror to reflect on our present. It shows us what we might achieve if we could transcend our limitations. Scientists still argue, and philosophers debate endlessly, about the perfectibility of human society. Is true utopia an achievable goal, or is it an inherent contradiction? Given the complexities of human nature and the unpredictable nature of existence, Star Trek offers a nuanced answer. Its future is not a static paradise. It's a dynamic, evolving universe filled with challenges, ethical dilemmas, and the ongoing struggle to live up to its own ideals. The characters are not perfect saints. They are, as we've discussed, flawed but striving individuals. This makes the vision more relatable, more attainable in spirit, even if not in every detail. It's not about reaching a final perfect state, but about the continuous journey of improvement, the infinite game of becoming better. So, if you can't have a personal transporter to beam you out of awkward social gatherings, or a holodeck to practice your Klingon opera singing without frightening the neighbors, though your neighbors might appreciate the latter, does that mean the dream is lost? Not at all. Perhaps the Star Trek future isn't about possessing specific technologies, but about embodying specific values. It's about fostering curiosity in our children, demanding ethical behavior from our leaders and ourselves, working towards sustainable solutions for our planet, and reaching out across cultural divides with a genuine desire to understand and connect. Maybe, you think, the real final frontier isn't just space, but our own capacity for wisdom and compassion. That's our little philosophical musing for the road. A quirky tidbit for our final stretch, there's a concept in Japanese aesthetics called wabi-sabi, which centers on the acceptance of transience and imperfection. It finds beauty in things that are incomplete, impermanent, and unconventional. Perhaps a truly human future, even a highly advanced one, will always have a touch of wabi-sabi, a recognition that not everything needs to be perfectly polished or eternally new. Maybe even the Enterprise occasionally has a squeaky floorboard or a replicator that insists on making everything taste faintly of bananas. And that's okay. It adds character. The Star Trek universe, with its vastness and its enduring optimism, serves as a powerful allegory. It suggests that even in the face of immense challenges, be they cosmic anomalies, hostile empires, or our own internal struggles, there is always a path towards a more enlightened, more humane existence. It encourages us to ask what if and why not. It fuels our imagination not just about what we can invent, but about who we can become. It's less a blueprint and more a constellation of hopeful possibilities, a guiding light in the often murky skies of our present. The specific stars in that constellation might shift. The technologies might evolve in ways we can't yet predict, but the overall direction towards greater understanding, deeper empathy, and a boundless future remains a worthy course to set. And as our long journey through these thoughts comes to a gentle close, as the hum of the imaginary engine softens to a whisper, Allow yourself to drift. The immense tapestry of space, with its billions upon billions of stars, stretches out before your mind's eye, not as a cold, empty void, but as a realm of infinite possibility, a place where dreams can indeed take flight. The challenges we've pondered, the complexities of human nature, the vastness of the unknown, they all settle now. Not as anxieties, but as gentle reminders of the grand, ongoing adventure of existence. The future, whatever specific form it may take, is not a fixed destination that we passively await, but a story that we are all, in our own small ways, helping to write one thoughtful action, one kind word, one curious question at a time. The starlight from those distant, imagined futures may seem faint from where we stand, but it travels an immense distance to reach us, carrying with it a quiet invitation to look up, to wonder, and to continue the journey with courage and with hope. Let the vastness of it all be a comfort, a soft blanket of cosmic perspective. The journey itself, this gentle exploration of ideas, is what matters, just as much as any imagined arrival. Rest now, with the universe unfolding around you, serene and full of quiet promise.